Okay, so as the mayor, I'm going to call this joint study session of the Planning Commission and the City Council of December 16th, 2020 to order. And if someone would like to call the roll, I could do it for the City Council, or you could do it.
I could do it for both bodies.
Thank you. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Roll call. So starting with the Planning Commission, Commissioner Brown.
Here.
Commissioner Crandall.
Here.
Commissioner Kaczynski.
Here.
Chair Pro Tem Wu.
Here.
Vice Chair Blackwell.
I'm here.
Chair Rowland.
Here.
And now moving on to the City Council. Council Member Duncan.
Here.
Council Member Knobloch.
Here.
Council Member Ferguson. Absent. Mayor Pro Tem James.
Here.
And Madam Mayor Ward.
Present.
Okay. So the next part of the agenda is oral communications. So members of the public who wish to provide comments to be read at this meeting on matters that are within the jurisdiction of the City of San Clemente, but not separately listed on the agenda, may complete the public comment submittal form available on the city's website at sanclemente.org/cc public comment. All comments become part of the public record. Transmittal by 4 p.m. on the day of the meeting is recommended. Comments will be read publicly at the meeting up to the allotted time limit of 3 minutes per person. Individuals may provide comments to be read during either oral communications part 1 or part 2. And I don't have any comments. I'm not sure if, I think I saw Laura Campanello in the call as well.
We do not have any comments for oral communications, but we do have comments for the agenda item this evening. So just let me know when you're ready for those to be read.
Okay. Well, this would be oral communications part 1 now. Oh, I see. For the comment. So that would be number 2 once we get to the inclusionary housing program. Thank you, Laura.
Okay. Well, if there are no comments under oral communications part 1, the next item is the inclusionary housing program in lieu of fee update, our second session. And the presenter on this item will be Senior Planner Jennifer Savage.
Good evening, Mayor, Council members, Planning Commission Chair, and Commissioners. I wanted to thank you for joining us this evening for our second study session for our inclusionary housing programs and in lieu fee updates. Next slide, please. Tonight's agenda, we have 4 items. We're going to give you a little bit of a background, high level about housing for the new council members as well as anyone else. And then we will hear 2 presentations, one from Jamboree Housing and one from Habitat OC. Their presentations will be up to 10 minutes. And after each of the presenters, there'll be time for questions and answers. And then we'll have our consultant for our update efforts, Economic and Planning Systems, also provide a presentation. Next slide, please. So first, I'm going to talk about 4 items for our background. These include planning for housing, how it relates to our inclusionary housing programs, a little bit of history for affordable housing in San Clemente, and then the purpose of our study session. Next slide, please. Planning for housing starts at the state level. The state of California has a housing element requirement. That is one element of our general plan for which the state requires of all jurisdictions. The state of California also issues what's called a Regional Housing Needs Assessment, or RHNA. That RHNA number is provided to SCAG, or Southern California Association of Governments. They provide the methodology to calculate and allocate those numbers to individual cities. And then the City of San Clemente uses that number to update our housing element about every 8 years. And that each housing element will contain items regarding needs, constraints, goals, and programs for housing in the city. Next slide, please. And that's where we get our relation to our current topic at hand, our inclusionary housing program. Our first goal in our existing housing element is to provide various opportunities for housing for all economic levels. And program number 5 of our housing element is to update our inclusionary housing program and remove fees. Two key components of our existing program I wanted to highlight are that the program requires 4% of very low or VLI, very low income units, to be built on site. However, we do have to provide alternatives to building those units on site, and the alternatives that we have in our current program are in lieu fees or even the donation of land. Next slide, please. And if we don't plan for housing, pardon the title, but this is just what happens if we don't plan for housing, what happens if the units don't get built. And there are impacts to the community. Those impacts include by right approvals or automatic approvals when development has a certain number of affordable units within the development. It includes fines, litigation or court orders, and even a loss of funding for certain programs that are currently funded by the state. Next slide, please. But what about us? What about San Clemente, apart from the state requirements? Next slide, please. We actually have a really good history of supporting affordable housing. We have a number of policies and programs which we currently implement and have implemented over the years, one of which is the inclusionary housing program. Next slide, please. Our inclusionary housing program, when it was first implemented, required 15% of units in a development to be affordable. And this is affordability at all levels. There are 4 different affordability income levels. In 2000, we looked at a different requirement and we reduced the percentage. But it was a reduction specifically because the housing costs at that time at the market rate level actually accounted for some lower income levels, but it did not account for the very low income levels, which is why right now our program requires 4% specifically for very low income. Next slide, please. As a result of our inclusionary housing program, over time, we certainly have built a number of affordable units. This list illustrates projects that have affordable housing units on site. Although this list shows over 1,000 units, affordability will term out, which means that the term that it was approved for, say 10 years or 20 years in the early days, will end. And so we actually have less than 500 affordable units in the city of San Clemente right now. Next slide, please. I'm going to throw a couple of numbers at you. Bear with me. So why would we want to plan for affordable housing? The first number I want to talk about is in relation to this term cost-burdened households. So it is, housing is considered affordable when you spend 30% or less of your household income on housing. And right now we have not quite half, just under half of the households in San Clemente that are considered unaffordable. They spend more than 30% of their household income on housing expenses. Another number to consider is how many seniors we have in our community. Seniors, because they typically have a fixed income over time, they will go into the lower income category. And right now we have almost a third of our community that's headed by a senior. The next number I want to look at is our draft number for our regional housing needs assessment allocation that's coming up. Right now we're looking at over 900 units, and this is broken down into the 4 different income categories. So there is a need to plan for housing not only for our community characteristics, but also from the state. Next slide, please. So just to give you a brief overview, there really is a need to apply for housing, both from the state, but also for our community. Part of that plan comes through our inclusionary housing program, and that really can be seen with the affordable housing that we have had in the past in San Clemente. Next slide, please. As you think about the presentations tonight and listen to our presenters, something to keep in mind is that we are here to update the program. Specifically, we want to clarify the calculation method for our in lieu fee alternative, and also ask whether we want to change the percent of the required affordable units. And a key item for tonight, our second study session, is to hear from our affordable housing developers. Next slide, please. And now that we've gone through the background, I will turn it over to Sharon with Jamboree Housing.
Hi, actually, it's Laura with Jamboree Housing. So, sure, of course. Mayor Pro Tem, council members, Chair, Vice Chair, and Commissioners, it's great to be here today. Again, my name is Laura Archuleta, and I'm the President and CEO of Jamboree Housing Corporation. Jamboree is headquartered in Irvine, California, with an office also in Sacramento, and we have about 20,000 Californians that live in our properties. Close to 20 years ago, we had an opportunity to work with the city of San Clemente and the Talega developers to fulfill their inclusionary requirements, which was 186 very low and extremely low income units there. And we were able to get that development built in 2 phases. And so we have been in partnership with the city of San Clemente since the time that development was built. So since that time, Jamboree has just really blossomed, and we've developed throughout the state, and we've built a dozen or so inclusionary housing types of development, along with redevelopment projects in cities that had large redevelopment programs. And we have been very active in veterans housing, senior housing, and permanent supportive housing for our chronically homeless and folks suffering from mental illness. So I'm happy to be here today. I think the type of planning that you're doing in this discussion is a great example of how to keep local control over what gets developed in your city and not lose control to the state or someone else who comes in and tells you where it has to be, what it has to look like, and dictate to you what you know best and your community knows best should be in your city. So I think building on staff's report of looking for a full spectrum of housing, I would say some of the benefits to inclusionary is that it is integrated within market rate housing, whether it's built on the same site or within the neighborhood. I think there's just some natural benefits to that for the residents that live there. And for the overall community, I think one of the toughest things to come across when attempting to build affordable housing is land. And so if you're working with a master developer or a market rate developer, they're typically out there tying up land. And so by bringing you in and partnering with them, you have a land opportunity. Other cities that have inclusionary that we've been successful in working in also have been here locally, Irvine, Brea, and Santa Ana. I think one of the keys to the program is having it be a win-win program where your market rate developers are getting some incentives, whether that be through incentives through the state density bonus law, or stepping that up a bit through expedited processing or other variances or incentives that can be given to that master developer to help offset any costs that can play to them. The other part of that, I think that's really important, is that you have a program that the developers out there who are negotiating for land know what the program is. And I think that's been really key. So if it's 10% for very low and low, or 15%, or whatever percentage you end up settling on, that those master developers know, and they can take that into the price of the land. The cost of inclusionary housing really shouldn't come off of be borne by the master developer. It really should be borne by the entire community through that project. And if you look at Talega, the master developer donated the land and $2 million to get that 186 units built. But we were successful in leveraging that, probably 5 times between the low-income housing tax credit program, the bond program, and bringing in other state funding to get that development built. And so it really is everybody kind of pitching in to get a project built. I did want to just make a comment, mention about the terming out, or, Jennifer mentioned that some of these affordable restrictions burn off on units. That's really important. I'm sure it's identified in your housing element to keep an eye on those. The cost to produce new units is far greater than trying to keep some of those units affordable. And so definitely keep an eye on that, because that's a way to preserve affordability and buy those units before they go to market and your residents end up potentially homeless. So those are my kind of general comments. I'm really available for questions if any of you have questions on how we get projects built. I think you're doing the right thing by bringing in a financial consultant to figure out what is the subsidy. You often hear cities, if they have an in lieu fee option, that in lieu fee just sits in the city coffers and never makes it out to actually get housing developed. Well, that's because probably that in lieu fee is not enough now to get housing developed. And with the loss of redevelopment and some of the other state affordable housing programs, I think everyone's looking for tools to get housing built. So Jennifer, those are kind of my prepared comments, but again, I'm available for questions.
So I have a quick clarifying question. When you talk about the timing out, and you said that we need to keep an eye on affordable units and buy them before they come up, what do you mean? That the city would actually try to buy those?
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you for a follow-up on that. They, when I say buy it, I mean buy the covenants. So let's say a unit's going to go to market. If I'm the city staff person, I might approach that owner and say, look, we know your units are ready to go to market in the next 5 years or the next 10 years. The longer you do it in advance, the less you'll have to pay for that covenant, and say, we really want to extend that. How much is it going to cost us? And start those negotiations early.
So in any of your projects that you've done, what is the time that they must be affordable? I mean, is there a time that they have to stay that way before they could be sold?
Yeah, currently the funding programs put the requirements on them, and in order to count them under your regional housing needs, there's also time limits, or time requirements. So typically it's 55 years or longer. Sometimes it's 65 years. If you work with a nonprofit like Jamboree, we're looking at permanent affordability, and so we would not be able to, under our charter, take our development to market.
Okay, so that's what I wanted to know, is if there is something happening now where affordable housing that we're doing now, we're saying this is affordable forever.
Right. I mean, I think it's tricky, and it has to do with how you record the covenants on the land. But I think if you're looking for affordable housing forever, then you can set up a program that does that.
Okay, thank you very much. That answered my questions.
Well, thank you for having me here, and I'll stick around. So if you do have follow-up questions, I'll be available.
Did anyone else have any questions on anything that she said?
Gene, did you raise your hand?
Okay, I'm not seeing anyone
I
yet.
saw Gene flash on the screen. I thought he waved his hand and then he disappeared. So I don't know if he's out there somewhere.
He might have hit the wrong button, but he will come back. Okay. So, Jean, did you have a question?
No, I was turning on my mute button, so I have to reach for my screen.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question. This is Commissioner Wu. Laura, the Jamboree project you built is a standalone affordable housing project. If a project in the future in San Clemente was required to provide an on-site unit, and that on-site unit becomes a very small number, be it 1, 2, or 3. And in your viewpoint, how much challenge does it present to the administration of this affordable housing management, or lease it out, to stay with the law requirement, etc.?
Commissioner, that's an excellent question. I think that one of the downfalls for requiring the inclusionary to be built within a development, whether it's a small rental development or a for sale development, is that you don't get the benefit of the cost reductions due to building a larger development, right? There's some costs that are just built into a project. And so those units do become more expensive. And you're also not able to leverage other funds. Like I talked about our ability to go to the state and to the county and bring those resources in to our Talega project, our Mendocino at Talega. If you're building it as part of a small market rate rental project, it's very difficult to bring in any of that subsidy. The other kind of layer onto that is if you go out to Mendocino, we run an after-school learning center there. We have programs that ensure that those kids have a safety net should they struggle in school, and just runs kind of supportive programs to make sure that they're going to be, those families are going to be successful in San Clemente. So that is not, that would be difficult to do in a small kind of standalone project. So I do believe having the most flexibility in an inclusionary ordinance that could apply to any type of development moving forward. So whether it be including the units within the project or building them off-site. I've seen programs be successful with that, where the developer still causes it to be built or builds it off-site, paying an in lieu fee that is enough to actually subsidize an affordable unit, or again, cause it to be built, like in the Talega case, where they came to us specifically after a couple of years of trying to do it themselves. They realized affordable housing finance is in its own different world and came to us and asked us to build it.
Thank you very much.
I have a question, Mayor Ward,
Go ahead.
Councilmember Duncan here. Laura, good to see you again.
Good to
I just say I live in Talega and I volunteered over at the Mendocino complex. I consider it a great success. So I guess maybe the first question is, what was it about that development that you feel made it successful? And then the second question would be, does Jamboree only get involved in those large scale projects, or is there a potential for Jamboree to be involved in something smaller scale like you were just describing?
Yeah, so I think that Mendocino at Talega, the first reason why I feel it was successful, now keep in mind, it's almost 20 years old, and it was the first family affordable project built in Orange County in 10 years. So you go back 10 years before that. And I think the reason why it was successful from the beginning was that we designed that project equal to the market rate development across the street. In fact, we have lower density than the market rate project developed by BRE across the street. So it was, high quality design from the very get-go. And then we brought in a very, very good property management company who worked with us to ensure that the folks we were renting to were qualified to live there. I mean, when you build affordable housing, you can get thousands of applications, and you go through and you make sure that they meet the requirements and that they abide by all the guidelines in the property. So those were, some of the initial things that I think set up Talega for success. And then we worked closely with the city and the city staff to identify what programs were needed at the property. We work closely with the school district to, again, ensure that our students are successful. I remember back in the early time, interesting story was that Talega Master Development were concerned that our residents might come and use their pool. And we said, well, they should have the right to use your pool and interact with the other residents in Talega, but we actually have our own pool too. So, we built a highly amenitized project there on site. So our residents feel equal to, as they should, and feel proud of where they live. Now, I'm not going to say everything has always been perfect at Mendocino, but I think it has been a national example of a successful project. I mean, I went back to Washington, D.C. and accepted an award from Fannie Mae on Mendocino because it was such a beautiful, well-managed property. So those are some of the reasons why I think it's been successful. The city staff really embraced it. Made sure that the community services staff, we knew what programs were going on. The beach bus was coming by, our kids could ride down to the beach. So all those things, right, make a development successful. So you become part of the community and a benefit to the community.
Right.
Thank you.
Crandall, go ahead, Don.
Yeah, the question for Laura is, since we're fairly well built out here, now comes the trade-off between the cost of land, where we can get it, and probably demolition or infill. What is the reasonable size unit that makes the economics, in your view, plays? It obviously is not 4 units or 7 units, whereas Mendocino is over 100.
Yeah.
And so where is that cost trade-off break-even number, in your view, looking at our situation here in San Clemente?
Yeah, and I apologize, Councilman Duncan, I didn't answer that second part of the question in terms of size. So we are doing 10-unit developments in cities where we have a project. So for example, in San Clemente, we could do a very small development because we would wrap that property management into what we're doing at Mendocino, and we would provide services at Mendocino for those families and provide transportation to get them there. Now, if there was a city probably outside of Orange County, we would do the same in Sacramento, we do the same in Anaheim or Irvine, where we have more developments. But if it's a area where we don't have a larger development, it's tough to do that. We acquired, I'm trying to think, 11 units in Temecula, and that has been a little bit more challenging to even manage that small development. So it's right, it's about scale, it's about presence. And but I think when it comes to San Clemente, that's a city that we have had this long history and partnership with, and I know there's been some challenges there with the homeless population, and we really would like to help, with solutions, even if there's small developments.
So you would hub and spoke it, so to speak, a 10 or 11 unit somewhere in San Clemente, but the management would come out of Mendocino as far as
Correct.
That's the hub, and
Yep.
we would spoke to other size areas wherever land could be made available, or
Right.
Or keep it guessed. Thank you.
Right.
Okay, Mark Crandall, Commissioner Crandall. When you say 10 units, are you assuming no land cost?
So Commissioner, it's like a whole layering in a financing, and it depends on what affordability level you want it at. So if you're at 50% of the area median income or below, which is really where your needs have been identified by your staff, you typically are looking at very little, if any land cost and then subsidy on top of that. So like I said, like with Talega, it was free land and $2 million. And then we were able to bring in the other funding sources.
Okay, and then the other question is, have you ever done one on leased land?
Yes.
You have.
Yes, and oftentimes I see our cities or housing authorities feel more comfortable doing a long-term lease. So let's say the lease is 65 years and the affordable covenant is 65 years. And they know that at 65 years, then they're going to get the property back and they can keep it affordable or do something with it at that point. But keeping in mind, they're going to have those residents that live there at that point.
Certainly.
Yeah.
And we have the one project downtown, I think it's 19 units, and I don't know how, if planning can tell me, was that land purchased by the builder or was that given to the builder?
Yeah,
Jennifer, I think you have an answer for that, right? I think,
yeah, so that was part of the transaction with the developer. That land at one point it was provided to one developer who turned out to be unsuccessful in building the project, and it was turned back over to the city, who then sold it to the next developer. Now there is a nuance to land in these transactions in that sometimes they are sold, but within the paperwork, it's not necessarily fully sold and paid for by the developer, but it ends up to be a donation per se.
Madam Mayor, I have a question.
Go ahead.
Hi, Laura. Question. Does Jamboree do any market rate developments, housing developments?
So we don't do straight market rate. We're, as a 501c3, we're incorporated under the safe harbor laws, which means that 75, development, 75% of the units have to be at 80% or below. And out of that 80%, 20% have to be at 50%. So we could have a market.
Okay, thank you. Of the 20,000 people that live in your units, where are the bulk of those people? Where are the bulk of those units located?
So we have a really good hub here in Orange County. And then we've got a good grouping now of 15, 18 developments in the Sacramento region. And LA County kind of spread throughout Long Beach, Claremont, a little bit there. 2 developments down in San Diego, the Inland Empire. I would say the areas we're not in kind of the Fresno, Central Valley. We're not in necessarily the Bay Area, but we are in, we're in Santa Clara County.
Yeah. Laura, I wanted to ask you also, you mentioned in your presentation that to achieve affordable housing, I think you mentioned, I forget your exact phrase, but I think you said it's not fair for the developer to bear the cost. And yet when Montecito was built, the developer donated the land. And then you said that a number of entities came in with financing and helped you. And then you wrapped up the comment by saying it's a community event. Everyone has to contribute to make this happen. But our current plan doesn't allow for community involvement. It's really on the developer. And I guess my question is, the state currently has, with the programs they have for the density bonus laws and so forth, the state's addressing this issue to allow the larger community. Or actually, they're not allowing the larger community; they're imposing that restriction. So I guess I just was a little not concerned, but it raised my attention, my red flag a little bit, if you will, when you say that we don't want this burden to be on the developer. Everyone has to contribute, but really everyone's not contributing. It really is a burden on the developer, don't you think?
You know what, I don't, and I appreciate you asking the question, because I think what we saw in Talega was we saw the master developer get incentives that were above and beyond a density bonus law. But when they negotiated their development agreement and their land use agreements, they got incentives that created additional value in that land. And
Yeah,
then therefore they could afford to donate the land and a couple $1 million. And then on top of that, when I say, so what I'm saying is I don't think the master developer, the market rate developer should bear the entire cost. I think there should be incentives. And I think that there is funding that we can then go and get from the county and the state.
when Talega was developed, though, we had hundreds and hundreds of acres of vacant land, and it was easily a logical and appropriate thing. As Don Brown mentioned, we're at build out. We had in 1980 when we started our program, and when you a few years later when you built your project, we had 27,000 people and lots of land. Right now, we have 67,000 people who don't have any land, and yet our current program, our current ordinance and standard requires not a conglomeration of involvement, but the involvement of the developer that happens to own a small parcel of land. I think we've addressed that in a number of ways by the ADUs and by the assembling lots like we just did, the council did last night. But it really is a burden currently on a developer to try to meet these standards.
Sure. I mean, I think if you look at your housing element and your production, and if you're meeting your demands, then, then there's not a need to do anything else, but it doesn't appear right now like you are. And so that's why I would say, I think it's worth talking to them. Now, I know a market rate developer is not going to agree with me. And I'm on the California BIA board of directors. So I work with the builders all the time, but I will tell you across the state, BIAs and market rate builders are working with their cities to come up with solutions that include inclusionary programs.
They have to, because that's the standard. You mentioned meeting the demands. Those are self-imposed demands. Those self-imposed demands can be unimposed, and which is interesting because in this project we were looking at the build out and the alternatives, and I didn't see in any of the alternatives the elimination of the inclusionary development program, which many cities around us don't have any. I didn't see any reduction in the fees at all. There was quite a focus on increasing the fees. So I guess to use the Mendocino example that took place decades ago when we had hundreds of acres of raw land to develop, it's really not a fair analysis to what we're facing today. I appreciate you mentioning it, and it's a good example of how this could work under the right circumstances. My concern is our circumstances are greatly different than they were then.
So Laura, quick question. You mentioned that Mendocino was a landmark, example of a good way to do affordable housing for very low. And I know Jamboree, I believe you get funding from all the major developers and corporations within our county. Do you ever go out, Jamboree itself, and go out and look for maybe opportunities where there is some land, an abandoned church, strip mall, something like that is,
Yeah.
Is that something that you do?
Yeah, just so we're about 30 years old. I've been here 22 years. And I would say just within the last 5 years, we've actually had some resources where we've been able to go out and make offers on land. The first site was that we were able to purchase before we had all of our funding lined up was in Santa Ana, which we had to buy it at like a market rate developer would, close on it quickly, and then we lined up our funding, and that is now the largest housing development for our disabled veterans here in Orange County. And so that one was a successful one, but I can tell you it was very stressful taking down, a piece of land before we had our funding lined up. We also have partnered with a church in Garden Grove where we didn't have to buy the land. The church was looking to bring in a revenue source, and they share in any revenues on that property. And we were able to develop an intergenerational project for seniors and families. So we are now out looking for land. with cities that oftentimes they'll have affordable overlay zones. So looking like what I would call a regular developer, where we're taking the risk and we're trying to identify those cities that support the type of housing we're developing. We review the housing elements, we figure out, what the needs are, and then we're moving forward on those projects.
Okay. So I guess San Clemente, we could go around and look at any of the parcels, adjacent to housing that, like, say something is a church or, school or something like that. And would we be able to make that, have an overlay on that to where if that ever became available?
Yeah. And I know cities, through their housing element process, when you're doing the site identification, you can put that in there to encourage affordable housing to get developed there. Absolutely.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
A comment I think that Laura brings up that is worthy of staff and maybe council consideration as we go into this housing element renewal next year was one of the things that got us across the finish line in 2011 or 12 was, in fact, we created the affordable housing overlay about that time. And I think as we look at where we've laid it in, that maybe going forward, it's time that staff relook at that and where it's located so that we have more flexibility going forward, since these arena numbers that are starting to flow out of Sacramento and through the county are going to be a steep hill to climb. And so I just throw that out there that we do have an overlay, but maybe it's time from a staff perspective to go relook at that if the council so desires. So
Don, do you mean relook at the actual land?
Where the overlay related it, where it's actually located? Yeah, I mean, there's large portions of the town that are not included in that. And so it's something to consider as we go forward, as we have to update our housing element, is have staff look at where it's located now and what the possibilities are of expanding it.
And we will be looking at that as part of our housing element update. In the current housing element, we have a residential sites inventory list, and we have to update that with every housing element cycle. So we will be exploring all those opportunities to look at opportunities and constraints for any land that we have in the city.
So usually the staff hits the planning commission with that about 9 or 10 o'clock at night. It's really a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's a good conversation. So I do want to mention to the Planning Commission that the council did send a letter to SCAG supporting a closed session discussion on those arena numbers, because there is some question as to the methodology or the numbers that SCAG gave out. So I know most of you probably know that, but I didn't know if you know that we actually sent the letter, trying to clarify those, because those numbers are very high. Anyway, that's another conversation, but it certainly, is part of this. And we want to make sure that those numbers get clarified and are correct. So I do remember, being on the Planning Commission that we did with the general plan. I think we were putting different overlays on, and some of those, one of them in particular, I think didn't work out totally for total affordable housing. I think it is a memory care housing. Does anyone remember that? It's on Frontera. You approved it, but isn't that like
Aegis.
a memory care? Aegis?
Yes, that was the Aegis project.
Okay, so what classification, if any, does that fall into?
It actually doesn't fall into a housing category. It's considered institutional.
Okay.
So it's not residential. Although the city did approve a project on that site, we understand from the applicant that they are no longer pursuing that development. And I believe the property is again for sale.
Wow, so that's news. Okay, so that's a nice flat piece of property that I believe Is it still owned by the Church Cecilia's, or is it, did the developer purchase it?
I believe it still is owned by the church. I think that they were in an agreement with the developer if everything were to go through, but I don't think that that sale was complete.
Okay. So maybe that's a property that we could look at putting an affordable overlay on again, right? Don, you're shaking your head. So, okay. All right. So
Madam
that's
Mayor?
interesting. That's good to know because I don't think any of us were aware of that. And I know that
Madam
was a site we looked at.
Madam Mayor, this is Gabriel Perez, City Planner. Just wanted to inform the Plan Commission and City Council. There is another presenter that we also want to present, which is OC Habitat. And so just want to make sure there's an opportunity for them to present on what they provide and they could provide for the City of San Clemente.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you, Gabriel. And so now we will turn it over to Habitat OC. And if IT could bring up their presentation. Thank you.
Good evening. This is Sharon Ellis. I'm the CEO of Habitat for Humanity of Orange County, which is part of a much, much larger organization called Habitat for Humanity International. But our focus and our work is all done here in Orange County. So just a brief overview. We know a lot of people know about the name of Habitat, but sometimes they get a little confused about what we actually do. So we'll go on to the next slide. What we do is build homes, community, and hope. And how we do it is in home building and home ownership is the goal. And why we do it, because there is a significant impact when it comes to the hope of home ownership for many families and communities throughout the United States and around the world. So our mission is, we'll move on to the next slide, seeking to put faith and love into action. Habitat for Humanity brings people together to build homes, community, and hope. And our vision is really very simple. It's a world where everyone has a decent place to live. So how do we do it? We'll go on to the next slide. We build with contractors, which sometimes gets lost in this process of conversation, because what we are known for is the fact that our families actually are building, and we work with volunteers as well as licensed contractors, and we always have a licensed supervisor on the site. So the homeowners and the volunteers are not kind of out there on their own. Homes that we build are sold to very low, and moderate income families. And I will mention that there was one development that we did in San Juan Capistrano. I'll show you a picture of that a little bit later. For veterans, it was actually the first development in the United States that was built by a Habitat affiliate and specifically marketed to veterans. Veterans could have always applied, but perhaps were not linked to Habitat. So this one was very focused on veteran homeownership. Since 1988, we have built 227 homes. And one of the things that I'd like to say about the homes that we've built, and I think it's kind of interesting, and it'll come up a couple of times, I think, is the fact that we've never had a foreclosure, which I think is an incredible thing to say about the families who become Habitat homeowners and about the program that Habitat puts together to really help our families become successful homeowners. So we'll go on to the next slide. What we look for when we're looking for families is the need for affordable housing, the ability, they're going to be paying closing costs, down payment, and they assume a mortgage. And they need to be willing to work with us. They're going to be putting in 500 hours of sweat equity during the construction of the homes, which I will say is incredibly transformational for many families. They come in today, and there's a long process before they actually become a homeowner, but there's a transformation that goes on for those families that is incredible to watch and to see as that family begins to realize that their hard work actually is going to turn into something that will be of great value to them and to their family. We'll go on to the next slide. Homes are sold on the basis of a family's income. Where you and I would be going out and purchasing a home and the seller says this home is valued at $900,000, $1 million. What we do is base the cost of housing on the homeowner's income, and we commit that not more than 30% of their income will go to their housing costs. So we work with local banks and help them secure mortgages through the local banks. And when the homes are sold, so families live there 10, 15, 20 years and are ready to move on to a market rate home, we will repurchase that home and qualify another homeowner. The goal for us is that these homes are in perpetuity for affordable housing. On to the next slide. How do we do it? What do we build? I think there are some people who have the perception that we just build single family homes. And there are probably many places across the US where that is the case. But we have built everything from single family homes to a 48 unit development in Rancho Santa Margarita. We build based on the needs in the community and the city, and different products, different styles are really something that become very individualized with each city. So we have three examples of things that we've done that'll give you a perspective. I think one of the things that is always very frustrating is that when you mention affordable housing, there is this perception that is different than what we build. So if you go on to the next slide, this is an example of two homes that we built in Tustin. One is about 1,465 square feet and the other is a little over 1,500 square feet. And these homes were built in 2018 and are an example of a small infill lot that the city of Tustin had. And this was the product that we were able to provide. We'll go on to the next slide, which is an example of a larger development. This is a 27 home development that we did in Juan Capistrano. And you can drive by there. I think one of the incredible things about this development, this is the one that we marketed to veterans. When these families were building their homes, they began to build this community. We rarely tell families when we're doing larger developments, we rarely tell them which house is theirs. What we tell them is that they're building a community. And they don't know the address of their house until probably 4 to 5 weeks before we get to the end of construction. So what you've really built from the beginning of that is a community. And in this community, they know the name of every child, every elderly person. And if somebody maybe is doing something that mom or dad wouldn't like, there's a neighbor that's going to say, Johnny, I don't think your mom would like that, and know the name of the child and the parents. It's an incredible opportunity for relationship building and community building. The next slide is a project that we will be starting in Stanton. This is a 6-home development, and this is about a third of an acre of land. And we will be starting this one in January. So the next one, how do we do it? The average cost of construction is about $420,000. The average time to build is about 10 months. And somebody says, well, why do you need 10 months? Well, one of the things that you need to remember is that those families are putting in those 500 hours of sweat equity, or individually 250 per person. So we need to make sure that they have the time to get that sweat equity in. So our construction time averages about 10 months. How do we sell? We'll go on to the next slide. Habitat determines the sales price of the home based on HUD's income guidelines and the family size. So I'm sure you are probably pretty familiar with that, but depending on the size of the family, that income could vary and the cost of the home could vary. But again, it's based on 30% of the homeowner's income. There is usually a gap between construction costs and the sales price. In many cases, that gap is filled in partnership with the city, but we also are a philanthropic organization and actively fundraise for the construction of homes throughout Orange County. And I guess the last question, the next question is, why do we do this? And I think this is part of what's so incredible, is the transformation that goes on for our homeowners. One of the things that they are doing is growing equity. They're growing wealth. And that is a valuable piece of information, I think, when it comes to why do we build? We want the next generation not to be a candidate for habitat homeownership. We want them to be candidates for market rate homes. So when we are looking at families, one of the things that I think is kind of interesting is that many of the families who come to us are spending 60–70% of their income on housing costs. When we share with them the opportunity to purchase a home using 30% of their income, we now need to think about what's the difference between that 70% and 30%. What are they going to be doing with that? So we really help them become more financially responsible. We want them to become thoughtful about things like how to prepare their kids for college. So we have a college-bound program that we provide for all of our families because we want that next generation to be purchasing a market rate home. So on to the next slide. Why do we do this in the community? Homeowners are more likely to participate in local elections, local activities. They get involved in their community because they know that they are going to be there for the long haul. They want to participate. They want to be involved in their children's schools and their local churches. And I think the thing that is so powerful for me is that it really helps complete the housing spectrum. Whether you are a homeowner or a renter in the community, you really want to be engaged. But we know that as families become more invested in that community, have the opportunity to purchase a home, they are going to stay and become stable members of that community. Just wanted to share a couple of stories that I think are pretty significant. The next slide is a story about Raphael. He and his brother both attended the college-bound program along with their parents. Raphael not only got his bachelor's degree, he also got his master's degree in mechanical engineering. And what's very cool is that his brother is following in his footsteps. These two young men will never be candidates for habitat homes. They will be candidates for the market rate homes that we have in our community. The next story is about another family. Armando is actually a young man who, when his parents purchased their home in Fullerton, he was 14. He is now married. He's a business owner, has 2 children. He actually moved back into the city of Fullerton, where he was raised, and he has just purchased a market rate home for him and his family. Those are the kinds of stories for me are the power of what Habitat brings to a community. And one last one is a big thank you to all of you for hearing a little bit more about what Habitat does. And I'm happy to talk with you about any opportunities that or things that you would like to talk about to learn more about Habitat and the program that we provide. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon. Something to think about for the council members and planning commissioners is how this might relate, how their work relates to our inclusionary housing program and in lieu fee. I wonder if Habitat could talk about any funding sources that they might need from cities, perhaps the city of San Clemente, to do a project within our jurisdiction.
Thank you, Jennifer, for bringing that up. Our experience has been with cities, certainly before when we had redevelopment, cities were brought land and funding to an opportunity. Since then, our conversations with cities are very much the same. Land, opportunity for funding. But those have varied based on the cities that we've worked in. In some cases, the land is conveyed to us. We are now working with one city that is leasing the land. So it varies depending on the city's needs and what they would like to see happen in the city.
Madam Mayor, I have a question. Kathy? Oh, you're muted. Okay.
I'm so sorry. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Sharon, I just want to say, your projects are so amazing. The work that you do on a strictly volunteer basis is awesome. It's commendable. And I just want a quick question. When you sell, when your buyers buy the property, they increase the equity over time. When they sell the property at a profit, do they keep the profit, all the profit, or are they required by deed to sell it back to you? And when they do, when you sell it to another person, do you sell it again at that discounted rate? Do you have to make up the difference through donations, or how does that equity gap get filled when that transaction takes place?
So family number one purchases a home based on 30% of their income.
Right.
And at that time, we share with them the equity formula. And they are purchasing the home. When they sell it back to Habitat, and we would always have the right of first refusal, and we would always honor that. When we repurchase that home, it is based on the cost of the house, the number of years that they've lived in the home, and how much equity they have built in. So it is a shared equity formula, and families are very aware of that. And remember, they don't get the highs or the lows of the real estate market, where those of us who own homes would take that high or low, depending on what's going on. But for our families, that is an income they're purchasing at a discounted rate. So that takes them into consideration. So family number two will be in that same income range.
Right.
And we use the HUD income guidelines as our formula.
So they do get a significant chunk of the equity. You just share. It's just a shared equity scenario.
The shared equity, yes.
And I like Jennifer's question to you about your needs in San Clemente. Do you have any projects? Are you eyeing any projects in San Clemente currently that you might need some assistance on? I mean, we've got $1.8 million fund that we've collected for this purpose that's still sitting in the bank. So
you know what? I'm going to turn that over to Troy Hendrickson, who is on my staff, who has had some conversations, and I know he's had his eye on a couple ideas. Troy, you're on.
Yeah. Good evening. Thank you for having us, by the way. It's a pleasure to present and sort of bring what we do to this team. We have actually had some, this goes back probably, I'm going to say 4 or 5 months now, when Jennifer and Gabriel had initially, I think, reached out to us about, what a potential partnership might look like. We have looked at some sites, and we were mindful of the dollars that the city had in terms of a contribution, or a potential contribution, I guess I should say. And that really sort of is how we came to be here tonight, was to sort of, share what we do and how we do it, as Sharon said. But there's one thing, and if I didn't do justice to your question, please come back at me with it. But there's one thing that I think is important. Linda had mentioned in her presentation the terming out. And we actually have a mechanism to deal with that in terms of that first right of refusal. So between the covenants that are placed on the homes and that first right of refusal, when Habitat buys that home back and we resell it, those covenants basically restart. So those homes, when Sharon says in perpetuity, we mean it. And Habitat at our expense will go back in and do any of the rehab necessary to bring that home, to a respectable place, whether it be code or whatnot, and resell it. So again, that is, I guess what I would say, a difference in terms of Habitat will never probably compete with Jamboree in terms of doors, just based on 187 units. But also, as Linda mentioned, dirt is at a premium right now. And I think we're all trying to figure out, even look at the market rate builders, everyone's going vertical. So everyone has the same challenge right now. But again, some of them think they're placed at the table for everyone, frankly. I mean, some of these smaller sites would frankly make sense. And with your overlay and probably some rezoning, they're for larger sites. And then of course there's the ownership, side too. So again, if I didn't directly answer your question.
I just wondered if I don't expect you to maybe be specific, but do you have some prospects in San Clemente that might present opportunities in the future?
Well, yeah, we did. And I don't have the addresses in front of me.
Just curious.
But yeah, I think it was something we had shared with staff going back.
Thank you, Tony.
Sure.
Troy.
Mayor Ward. Sorry, did you call on me? You're on mute.
I'm trying to do that so that you can't hear everything in my house. I'm so sorry. Yes.
No worries. Hi, Sharon. Thanks for the presentation. This is, I'm a member of the Planning Commission. I was just wondering if you have found any ways to have the ADU laws that have been passed in California over the last couple of years. Have you found a way to, have that work for you or have that be a positive for you in any way?
Thanks for the question. It is an interesting conversation and something that we have been interested in exploring. We certainly haven't done any yet. I do know that the affiliate in Monterey Carmel area have been very actively involved in that. So we have a model to go by, and we would be very interested in doing ADUs as well.
Thank you.
So Jim, going on that ADU comment, I think I saw, I don't know if it was in this report, a comment that ADUs are not very low. They're moderate cost housing. And I was wondering if there was any way, in incentives or I'm not sure if this is what Encinitas did. They were having trouble with their housing element and they came up with an ADU solution. But I think they set kind of they went ahead and looked at guidelines for design, kind of different models. And I think that some of those were a lower price. But I don't know if there's anything the city could do to help with any fees where it would encourage someone to do one that is very low. I don't know if that's what you were thinking.
It could be. I mean, one thing I would imagine, and Sharon obviously would know this a lot better than I would, but I would imagine there are some extra complexity. You'd have to have covenants with the, owner of the main unit. Things like that would have to go on. But maybe there is something like a contribution that owner would be doing, for example. So while there's some complexities, I imagine that I would hope that there's some opportunities in there as well that we might be able to take advantage of. And if some of that is using some of the in lieu fees, and we could, purchase some rights from the existing owner, for instance, in order to build an ADU on the property. I have no idea if that would be feasible or not, but that, those kinds of solutions might be something worth considering if that's something that the Habitat people have kind of engaged in and sussed out.
Okay, it's an interesting solution. I think that I'd like to see staff look into more of what Encinitas did, because I know they set those ahead of time, the different designs and I think costs or levels or whatever. So I'm not sure. I think that satisfied their housing element, but I'm not sure. So I'd like to, hear more about that. I think I tried to look into it and I didn't understand totally what they did.
Yeah, it's still pretty new, so I think I suspect it's we're plowing new ground with that, but it might be an opportunity.
For sure.
Okay.
Madam Mayor, if I may
Yes.
jump in, two things. One, the solutions that Jim suggested, And certainly there is some opportunity within the new state ADU regulations around his solutions. And then for the solutions that you mentioned, there's two mechanisms that the city would be pursuing. The first one is considering programs to include in our housing element update around ADUs. And then the second one is actually a regional effort in terms of creating ADU plans, sort of a pre-approval plan. And that effort is being managed by our County of Governments, OCOG. And so that both of those efforts, Kathy, that you mentioned, as well as some potential solutions that Jim mentioned, may come before you in the near future.
Okay, thank you. I think we're all trying to figure out this ADU, what's going on with it. But, with all the new laws that the state is doing, and, we incorporated some of them last night. And we also did, we approved your lot consolidation work that you did for those substandard lots, trying to make some housing happen here on some of those lots. Go ahead, Don.
Yeah, I think Western City Magazine had an article on Encinitas success story here about a month or two back that maybe the planning staff will look at.
Thank you. I'll look that up.
Mayor Ward, this is Mike Blackwell, Planning Commission.
Yes, Mike.
Hi. This is just a very interesting discussion that we've been having now for some time. And I just want to share with everybody, and I have a couple questions also as part of that sharing. But back in March, on behalf of the city, I was sent out to the League of Cities meeting early March. And interestingly enough, the discussion was all about housing. And there was a lot of energy, a lot of concern, and a big concern, especially from those numbers that came out of Sacramento. We were all wondering, how on earth that would even be possible. And over time, we ended up coming up with our own numbers here. Our RENA numbers were kind of surprising as well. But the thing I want to share is that it seems like we are working to really address like a moment in time, a snapshot. Lots of studies were done, lots of energy was put into these studies. And though clearly we have a need, I question that need and what it really looks like, or what it will look like when there's some stabilization in society, at least in Western society, as a result of COVID. The discussion happened in March. It was the first week of March. We're still looking at a lot of the same data, and more people are working from home. And I know a big part of the housing need is to serve some of the, working people that, should be able to live near where they work, and it should be affordable. Well, that model is changing. And right now it's our new. I don't know how permanent it's going to be. I don't know how much of it will stick, but let's assume some. That means there's going to be a significant impact to those numbers that we all did our math on, last year and the year before. So, we're working to serve that math right now. And I've seen little conversation, and maybe Jennifer or Laura or Sharon can add some, information to the discussion here that's more, recent. And maybe we can start thinking about, the decisions we're making when it comes to being so aggressive about our housing numbers, and whether or not there truly is a need, at least to the extent that, the math showed us, a year or two ago. So I think that as I live my life and professionally and personally, I'm noticing that people are driving less. Many of my colleagues now are permanently working from home when they've always worked in an office, had to get in their car and commute 15, 20 minutes, an hour or more, and did so for 20 plus years. Now, suddenly working at home. That's the new norm and standard for many companies that are Fortune 100 companies. They're gigantic companies, and much of their work staff is no longer They're required to get in the car and drive to the office. So their need isn't the same. They don't need to be within a reasonable, commute to the office. They can be really anywhere, really anywhere in the country, anywhere there's an internet connection, So I think that is something that's been not discussed a lot. And from a land use perspective, and as a planning commissioner, I think about those things and how we use land and, how we need to use land are very important components to consider. So I think, though this machine is definitely moving and things are happening, it may be worth a little bit of a pause and discussion. So we're bringing in experts. These are folks that, know the latest and greatest, and we're bringing them into the discussions to help our city make best decisions for the community that we serve. So I think it's important maybe to think about how quickly we make those sorts of decisions, and we start, codifying, code and all this, but we're doing it again on a snapshot in time.
Thank you, Mr. Blackwell. So let's talk about what is our timeline for our housing element at this time.
This is Jennifer. So two things. One is definitely an important conversation. And I think that if we wanted to have the conversation, the larger conversation about housing, we can certainly find a time to do that. For this evening, however, I would like to keep a focus on the inclusionary housing program because that is our focus this evening. We still have public comments and one more presenter.
Okay, let's go. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And then so I wonder if I could suggest asking if there's any more questions from our from Jamboree and Habitat OC as it relates to the use of inclusionary housing in lieu fees or the program with the city.
Mayor Ward, I have a question for Habitat for Humanity.
Go ahead.
Sharon and Troy, you mentioned that the average cost for the unit is $220,000. That's not including sweat equity, and I think I heard 50,000 plus minus. So that put the total cost of construction per unit at almost $500,000. What is the average size of your unit in your building?
The average size of our units vary depending on what we're building, but I would say probably 1,100 to 1,400 square feet. Troy, is that about right now?
Yeah, I would agree with that. Probably closer to the 14, but when the lot and the build allows for it, we try to do 3-bedroom, 2-bath units. So that's how it ends up being in that, I would say more like 12 to 1,400 square foot range. And that would include whether it be an attached or a single family detached home.
Okay, well, so that's still pretty expensive to build. And you don't have that economy of scale of larger home builders. Now in San Clemente, we have quite a few infill lots, and you can build a duplex or triplex there. What would make it work for you to come to San Clemente and do a project? Right now, there are a lot of people that they're willing to work. They may be willing to help to build their own homes. And what would make it work for Habitat for Humanity?
Well, I think there has to be a blend, frankly. And what I mean is, if we can somehow acquire the land without any cash out of pocket, that would allow us to, do something on the low side. If we have to pay for that land, that might require us to do maybe a mix of low and moderate. Like I said, there's the sweet spot, and it depends on where you can get the land and what the desire of the city is to do in terms of, income level of the families.
Okay, thank you. Well, we have about, as a council member, Noble like already asked you, we have about $1.8 million in the fund. That isn't a lot if we're looking at free land. So, but
Well,
anyway, thank you very much.
Understood. And just again, I think it's worth mentioning that that's sort of this beauty of the ground lease too. We just completed a deal where, yes, the city owned the land or acquired the land, but we came to terms to build 2 homes with a 99-year ground lease. So those homes will be affordable long after any of us have to worry about it.
Now for Jennifer, if those homes has a covenant with longer period of time for their affordability, do we get an extra credit to meet the arena number?
We do not get extra credit, but it reduces the number of units that we have to keep track of that are at risk of becoming not affordable.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, so let's move on to, should we do the other presenters or should we do public comments?
Yeah, so I think that if there are no more questions for Habitat or Jamboree, we can let them sign off this evening unless they want to stay. They are certainly welcome to. And then it might be helpful to go to the Economic and Planning Systems presentation.
Okay, thank you for your presentations very much, the information.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Well, I am Darren Smith with Economic and Planning Systems, and with me is Julie Cooper in another rectangle somewhere on your screen. And first of all, I'd like to thank Jamboree and Habitat for their presentations. I thought that was very helpful, and I certainly welcome to stick around and hear what we have to say and chime in as appropriate. And tell us we're all wet if they think so. But I welcome a robust conversation this evening. As you know, we were here a few months ago to present the analysis that we had done at that time, which included a review of your existing regulations and a survey of what other jurisdictions are doing, as well as some new calculations regarding the costs to subsidize affordable housing and how that compares to the in lieu fees that you are currently charging or have been charging your new development. And there was a lot of conversation that evening and a lot of different opinions. And we understand, and I can feel from the conversation already this evening, that there is likely to be a diversity of opinions here. But for the sake of our study, we would love to get some direction about next steps. So this is a brief conversation about what we already presented, essentially, and a request for, I don't know if a straw poll or is the appropriate approach or what, but some direction about the guardrails of what you're interested in us having continue to explore would be very helpful as direction to both staff and us as your consultants. So the 3 things that we talked about last time, essentially, one is you have your in lieu fee. Again, as a reminder, as Jennifer led off with, you have the inclusionary requirement that you've been applying as 4% of new homes in new developments are expected to be delivered as very low income units. That is in your housing element, but in your zoning code, you say 15%. And so there's an inconsistency there. So one of the things that we would love to do with you is to clarify between these documents what the standard really is. And again, you've been applying the 4% as new projects come online. So if that's the will, then it seems to me that there should be clarity and consistency with the other documents of the city. And again, the 4% is applied as very low income, whether the development in question, the market rate development in question, is for sale or for rent. The 15% requirement in your zoning code is actually different than that, not only in terms of the percentage, but also the income characteristics. In the case of rental, it's expected that that 15% would be divided between very low and low income units. And on the for sale side, it's expected that it would be split between low and moderate income units. And I'm happy to talk again about what those terms mean, but I think there's been an introduction on that earlier. So again, one thing is consistency among your documents and what your policy really is. A second thing is what the in lieu fee is. Now, again, even with the 4% standard that you've been requiring, virtually all of the new developments that you've had in the city in the recent past have opted to pay you a fee instead of producing those units within their project. And there's any number of reasons that they might choose to do so, but the most compelling reason that they might choose to do so is because it is financially to their advantage to do so. The fee that you have been charging is based on a formula that is out of date and data that is out of date, and is essentially for a new single family home, an average size single family home, they might pay about $4,000 toward this fee. And our estimate, based on the actual costs of construction for affordable units versus the value of those affordable units at the very low income level, is that the production of a unit for a very low income household needs a subsidy of something like $250,000. And so as a result of that, if you have that, 4% of your units would have been these very low income units. It would have cost, say, for those 4 units, maybe $1 million in subsidy required to do them. You divide that by the number of units in the project, and it comes out to about $10,000. So our math, again, which we have vetted with locally active for-profit and nonprofit developers, suggests that the in lieu fee to truly recover the costs required for producing units should be closer to $10,000 than $4,000, which is effectively what your current formula says. So we think it's important to have the conversation about updating the fees to reflect modern contemporary cost structure, and think that that would be a significant impact or increase rather in the current fee, but still well below what some other communities are charging. And finally, we think, again, there's been a diversity of opinion expressed both this evening already and last time regarding this one in particular. But the 4% requirement that you have is very low percentage among communities that have inclusionary requirements. We acknowledge straight away that not every community has an inclusionary requirement, but those that do tend to be in the 10 to 15 to even 20% range rather than the 4% that San Clemente charges. And we can show on the subsequent slides a comparison that we've done between San Clemente's 2 different printed standards versus those in other nearby communities. If we could move to the next slide, please. Okay, so this one is regarding rental developments. And again, you see San Clemente, the way the housing element expresses it all the way to the left, that's your 4% requirement. Your zoning code, which you have not been using as the actual enforcement of the inclusionary program, suggests it should be 15%. And you see that Laguna Beach is as high as 25, Laguna Woods, Lake Forest, and Encinitas are as high as 15. San Juan Capistrano and Oceanside are at 10% of all units as affordable units. So again, there are, as noted at the bottom with the asterisk, there are plenty of communities that don't have inclusionary requirements at all, but those that do tend to be higher than the 4% that you have. The next slide shows the same kind of comparison, but on the for sale standards. If we could see that one. And again, it's a similar story. You're at 4%, and the other communities are, again, typically from 10 to as high as 25%. And so what this means is that the development, we shared with you the results of some feasibility analysis the last time we were together, and we have had vetted that with locally active developers, and actually have had some continued conversations after the last time we were all together that have further validated the general assumptions that we have used for our analysis. Our analysis indicates that development is highly valuable in San Clemente and very feasible. I know that you have very few sites available for development, but your units are essentially, the latest unit value figures for San Clemente suggest that not only are units worth on average about $1.1 million in your community, but that figure has gone up by 7% during the past year, during which we've had a pandemic. As one of the commissioners said, the market has shifted some, but frankly only to the better in terms of home prices in areas that are a bit further away and have the quality of life characteristics that San Clemente has. We've seen similar increases in rents as well as for sale prices. And what that really means is it's not just about the people who are coming to your community, but the people who are already in your community potentially being priced out of existing homes that they have. That is a concern. Economic displacement for those reasons is a concern throughout California and throughout the country, increasingly so. So again, in our perspective, the purpose of an inclusionary program is not only to provide housing for people who do not yet live in your community and may be coming, but also to help with people who may be already in your community and facing some challenges in maintaining their homes or overpaying for the homes that they are currently in. So with that, I'd just like to reiterate the requests essentially on the subsequent slide, which is we would love to have some direction from you on those three items. We are scoped to produce some additional analysis, some additional studies, including reconciliation of your various policy documents and the language therein, including some analysis of incentives, as the affordable housing developers were speaking to earlier, incentives that may be offered that can balance the burden that is placed on market rate developers to provide affordable housing. That is definitely part of our scope as well, as to see where that win-win, as it was described earlier, can be found. But at this point, we have done analysis, but we need some direction regarding, again, sort of the bumpers, the guardrails of the programs that you would like for us to continue to pursue. And this is not requesting an action per se. It's just we're anxious to hear your thoughts and see if there is any consensus at all about which way or the parameters that you would like for us to continue to pursue.
So, Mr. Smith, I think when we had our last meeting, some of us were looking at housing opportunities in our city. And I think a lot of us said that it was future housing is in our mixed use zones. But I don't see anything in this report on that. Was that looked at all?
Well, we have looked at the feasibility implications of higher density multifamily development, and I think that's consistent with the mixed use district that you're speaking of. We've looked at the cost of acquiring properties for development, and we note, of course, that there are few at this point. Well, mostly we're talking about redevelopment opportunities of lower intensity commercial uses as being the primary opportunities for intensification and housing additions in your community. I look at your RENA numbers, And I recognize straight away that getting anywhere close to that kind of production is going to be a huge challenge for San Clemente. And I think that the mixed use and the affordable housing overlay that you've got is a great first step. And we have tried to incorporate the economics associated with that in the analysis that we have done. But beyond that, I can't say that, we haven't determined that it's a slam dunk that that's going to deliver all the housing you need at the prices that are required under RENA. I think it's still very challenging to think about 900 and whatever housing units coming to San Clemente in the next 7 years.
Well, I think that's what our issue is that I don't believe the council agrees with those RENA numbers.
I know.
So that is going to be an issue, and I'm going to be concerned going through this that as we go through it, that the city is accepting those numbers, because I don't believe that we are. I don't think that's the direction of the council. My concern.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I just, on that note, the numbers that we have calculated with respect to feasibility, with respect to the subsidies required for affordable housing, are not contingent on the RENA number. So even if you think the number should be half or a third of what you've been assigned at this point, that does not affect the per unit assessments that we have done.
Okay. So I think what we thought, at least what I thought, is that you would look at the mixed use and give us some feasibility of if that could work using the mixed use, or what the impacts would be to mixed use because, of parking, things like that. And so, I'm not sure, we seem to be just focusing on the in lieu fee. And I'm wondering if there's a reason for that, because I think, I know this is an inclusionary housing program, but what we're required to do with the state is to designate land that could be affordable housing. I think that is our only requirement, is it not?
Yes, correct.
Okay. So what we're talking about now is just if we need to revamp our inclusionary housing program. And so my concern is you're not explaining to us the difference of why our zoning says 15% and how that happened. We need to understand that and why we've been charging 4%. So how did that happen? When did we add 15% in our zoning?
This is Jennifer. I'd like to jump in on that. So we started with requiring 15% inclusionary back in 1980. And it was only in 2000 that our housing element had identified the desire to go down to the 4%. And it appears to be an inconsistency that the gap wasn't closed. So as you know, once you go through the housing element update process, there's programs identified in that housing element that require changes to things such as the zoning code. And it appears that the code was not updated to be consistent with our program and our housing element. And so that's why we would like to close that gap.
Okay. Does anyone know why we lowered it in the year 2000?
Yes. So in the year 2000, the housing element analysis had identified that the need for affordable units was specifically at that very low income affordability level. At the other levels, such as low and moderate, the actual available housing, rentals in particular, could actually accommodate the what we consider affordable rent at the low and moderate. So 30% of someone that would qualify as low income, our rents were satisfying that need, which is why we changed the percentage to 4%. Now that may not be the case, given that housing expenses certainly have risen since the year 2000.
Okay. So, I have concerns just changing it, throwing out a number. It sounds like 10,000 is what you figured is necessary to build a unit. But it seems to me what our issue here in San Clemente is land, trying to identify where that can be. So when do we have to have the inclusionary housing, the update? What is our parameters on that for time?
That's a great question. So this particular update effort is specifically for our existing housing elements, not our new housing elements. And so this update should really be completed before the end of next year, specifically October 2021. Earlier, if possible, and if you take a look at our existing housing element, this particular program, it was supposed to be completed a couple years ago. So we really do want to continue this effort and make sure we close this gap so that the state can see our progress.
So tonight, it seems like we're just focusing on the inclusionary housing percentage. Is that the case? Because that's what I'm hearing.
There's two questions, actually. First, the percentage, and something to think about is if the city has the goal of perhaps increasing the number of affordable units, do you want to increase that percentage so that if a housing developer finds an opportunity for housing, we're making sure that affordable units are constructed at the same time as market rate units? That's the first issue, the percentage. And then the second issue is with the alternative that we provide of in lieu fees, making sure that we're actually providing a concrete and clear calculation method, and that we adopt something that is actually reflective of any market changes. And our consultant can explain how we can potentially build that in, that over time the fee is changed relative to the building industry fees.
Okay, so this isn't just a flat fee that you're asking us to look at. You want it to escalate as the market changes.
That's something that certainly we would like some direction on.
Madam Mayor?
Go ahead.
In terms of direction, I'm not interested in the direction of tying our affordable housing fee to market development rates. We're not talking about development. We're talking about a fee for a goal. Our goal is to provide, and the primary goal of our inclusionary housing program is to provide more housing for people. We have a huge housing shortage for all levels, low income, moderate, and standard. So housing is the goal. Inclusionary housing helps low income people, but I'm concerned. I just have concern. If we want to increase housing, we should, and we're a town that's built out. If we want to increase housing in the land that we have available, we got to make it easier to develop, not harder. This makes our projects more complex, more expensive, and difficult, and that's problematic for me. I think we have an option with higher density zoning where we can allow it for infill projects. The mixed use is a great example of using property effectively. I think the ADUs are a wonderful opportunity to provide housing. But the concept of increasing the fee just because we can, I'm disturbed by it. In the presentation, we didn't have it, but in the one that staff held out, what kind of bugs me is in terms of options for changing our requirements, the comment is made, overall, the market value rate is high enough so that it's feasible to get more money. I mean, our goal isn't to get more money. Our goal is to provide housing. Increasing these fees will not produce one more unit anywhere. So I think we ought to focus on zoning, on our requirements for existing housing through mixed use and situations like that. That's just my personal thought on it. I think housing is needed, but again, in 1980, when we started the inclusionary housing program, we had thousands of acres of vacant land, thousands of acres. 42,000 people later and 40 years later, that doesn't exist. So we're squeezing this program, and I think we do what we can to help. I think Habitat for Humanity, I think the money we do have, that's a worthy goal. It's a free enterprise goal. It's not an involuntary extraction of fees from private property developers. It's a philanthropic, nonprofit enterprise, which I couldn't commend higher. So anyway, those are my thoughts, Mayor.
Thank you.
Mayor Ward.
And then who did I hear?
Mayor Ward, this is Mike Blackwell, but I can wait my turn. I don't know
Can
who's
you
raising
wait?
their hand.
Jim
Sure.
Rulin, and then Councilmember Duncan, and then Mike.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
I
Two
mean,
things.
John
One,
Brown. That's what I meant. Go ahead. Jim.
one, Jennifer, I just wanted to clarify from my understanding of our previous study session. In the past, while we've always been required to zone for low-income housing, we've never had to build it. We've never had to make sure it gets put in place. But that's not so much the case anymore, correct? Because there are penalties that we can get from the state now that if we don't reach those numbers. That was my understanding from the previous study session. Is that correct?
That's a good question. So, you know, penalties, we use that term, but in the case of not building the units, it's not a financial penalty, but rather it's just an impact on our development where if we haven't met our low income numbers, it's easier for a housing developer to come in and build a project if they provide a certain percentage of affordable units within their overall development.
So the impact to us if we don't meet our numbers is that we have less control over what's built in the city. Do I have that right? Less discretionary, architectural approval, that sort of a thing, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And the other comment I had or observation I had was I know there's some question about are these RHNA numbers right, or should they be half what they are or what have you. But when you're asking us, rightfully, for some guidance and guide rails, kind of my thought is well, what is our need here? We do have something, we do have businesses in town that need a lower income workforce, and they don't have that as available if we don't have housing for those people, for example. And there are other reasons for this housing, including what the state might or might not do to us. So how far away are we from that need? Because in terms of what those guardrails should be, if the need is great, then maybe one thing to consider is a higher requirement as well as incentives or whatever the right mix of that is. If the need is less, we would have, whatever, lesser mix that would be. So I think that would be helpful to understand that. And, if we're still halfway off on the RHNA numbers, but we're still a long way off from getting there, that would be good for us to know versus, well, if the RHNA numbers are wrong, we're pretty close to our goal and we don't need a large increase in fees, for example. So that would be good to understand that as in terms of giving you guardrails for parameters.
Yeah, absolutely. So if we're talking about where we are, what our status is, our last cycle, we were required to plan for 581 units, so just under 600. And we've made some good progress. We have about 212 left to meet the RHNA numbers. And it should be, I just want to clarify that number has to account for the lower units. So of those 581 units that we're required to accommodate for, we've gone above and beyond the market rate level, but we haven't met the lower income levels. And so that's something, that's a gap where certainly continuing and strengthening the inclusionary housing program would help us in the future. But in terms of status of where we are, we're close, but we're definitely not there just yet. And it's specifically the lower income units.
So for example, one of your recommendations might be that if we do have an in lieu fee, a greater percentage of that goes into the lower income units than the moderate income. I just want to get a picture of the kinds of things you might be recommending to us.
Yeah, absolutely. So I do want to highlight again that our inclusionary program isn't just a fee. Rather, the inclusionary housing program is specifically and primarily requiring the units to be built on site. And the fee is an alternative. So any development that comes into the city, if they're building a 25 unit development, they don't have to pay the inclusionary housing in lieu fee. They could choose to provide the 4% of very low income units, or if we change it, a different percentage on site. So what are we asking for you to consider today is if we wanted to move towards meeting our lower income goals, do we want to increase that 4% so that if a project that was 25 units came in, they'd be doing maybe 10%. Maybe they have to do 3 units at lower income levels instead of just 1. That would certainly get us closer to our goals.
Okay.
Quickly,
Well,
is there any I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, I'll just close with a comment that you asked for guardrails, and in terms of what, for me, I'd want to see any recommendations sort of tracking against the need, whatever that need is represented by whatever those RENA numbers are. So sorry, go ahead, Kathy.
That's okay. Don, I think you had a comment.
Well, I guess so. They're asking for direction, and maybe I'll diverge from some of the other comments. That the first thing I think we ought to consider or give guidance to staff is the fact that we ought to merge the inequities or the differentials between the housing element and our zoning element. And I think we need, in this complex age, keep it simple is the way to go. In other words, we need to match those two, and we obviously we diverged from that over 20 years ago, and I think it stands to reason that we take the housing element percentage and our current zoning element, and we merge that to some common number, and then the staff can go back and work the staffing that comes through us to use for the general plan amendment and for the zoning part of it, along with the housing element, which is going to come due next year. And we're already 200 units behind the current element, and so we're kind of scrambling there. But the biggest issue then is the stake and hold us accountable for is we don't have the plan, and now we have to incentivize whether they're going to come and make it build, if they can build it. And if you look at the data, we have to incentivize them to, in fact, either put the money in the bank so we can leverage that. So we only have 1.8 million in the bank, but like the expertise said, if you get about a $10,000 fee out of it, you can in fact go to the market with leverage and in fact get some more housing out of that. And so when we went through the thing on Avenue Sarah and we went through Cotton's Point, the funding for this stuff gets very complex. That's why you hire the HRHs and you hire the Marlboros and all that stuff that know all this stuff, because it's a science and a career progression in itself, how you put together the state and the federal funding to make all this play. And so the in lieu fee to me, and I know some people are very reticent about it, got to merge up to about that 10 to 15% level, and we can give guidance to staff in the zoning element, make more towards very low and low. But my feeling, if you wanted to keep it simple and keep some numbers out there that we can drive towards, merge the two documents and drive it into that 10 to 15% range. And that's my put.
Okay. Councilmember Duncan, did you have a comment?
No.
Okay. So Mr. Blackwell. Mike, are you still there? Okay, we might have dropped him off. So I do understand that our documents, have to match. So I didn't expect tonight, and I don't know if the rest of the council did, that we were going to be asked for a decision tonight. And so I would ask if, for the council, is there any will tonight to do that, or do we need some more information of what that cost should be? My concern, just real quick, is what that would do to market rate building, and what we've been trying to do of getting El Camino Real, with mixed use to take off. We have a current project that from our new general plan, and I'm not sure that he's selling those yet. So the comment that this is a good time because the market's good, I'm not sure those units have sold. Does anyone know?
I don't think they have.
So maybe the numbers are there, but I'm not sure the buyers are there. So,
What the mixed use in 1010 South El Camino Real you're talking about, Kathy?
yes.
There's 7 or 8 units there, but the low is 1.1 million and the high is 1.7 million with an ocean view. So that's
But I'm
definitely not in this affordable housing arena at
Right.
all.
But what we heard from Jamboree was so successful is that they built an entire center that had affordable housing. They weren't mixed in with market. They were close to market and they matched it, and that's in design, and that's why it was so successful. But I don't know for mixed use, if you make someone add affordable housing to that, I don't know if that affects the market rate of
The
those.
areas where we layered in a lot of mixed use was in the special emphasis zones for our general plan, which is up and down El Camino Real and over on Estrella. So you have a very reduced amount of land in the area in the city where we actually zone mixed use. And a lot of those areas are really, high price spread and with, potential for ocean views and peaks and all that. And so very quickly, it's going to be a challenge for the affordable housing building community like the ones we've listened to tonight to come in and acquire that type of land or make it play. So that's why you have to, I think, expand beyond just mixed use, because where we've allowed it in the city will not meet our RENA requirement, our present requirement of 212, a lot of which is very low and low. It's just not there. And so we need to look in other directions. That's just the political realities of where we're at. And so mixed use is not our salvation from where we laid it in when we did the general plan.
It's even possible that, and this is kind of beyond the scope of tonight, but just an idea is that we've got that mixed use on El Camino Real. It's kind of a strip. We could look at widening that strip to the other side of the alley. Or the paseo that's beyond there. So as we have a thicker area, you might say, running along El Camino Real. So again, I'm kind of starting to color outside the lines here, so I don't want to go too far. But it's maybe there's a future session of some brainstorming and looking at some ways that we could expand out where we zone that might help and address some of the issues that Donna's pointing out.
So one of the things that we have is, I don't see people moving from their homes here anytime soon, but there is some interest in the ADUs. And I'm kind of interested in whether we could promote that program more to get some of our housing. And like Jim said earlier, and we talked about that, maybe there is some incentives and things that the city can pay for, but puts a requirement on that it's for very low, low or very low, because I think that's the housing that we need. So I'm just not sure, I think our problem overall is land. It's always going to be land. And I don't know of anywhere where there could be a 25 unit project to get any.
Absolutely, Mayor Ward, and I agree with you there. If we expanded the lots, used alleyways and so forth, you still, for a developer to say, okay, I'll waive the fee, I'm going to build some low-cost housing. You got to have a project 20 units or more, and then you get 1 unit, maybe. That's very, very difficult. Again, the goal is more housing. If we increase the fee as this outline, when I read it, it's focused and geared and designed to provide a rationale for increasing the fee. We just collect more money. We're not getting any more housing. If we focus on making our ADUs and other sources of housing available, our kids can now live in the town. We can provide lower cost housing. There'll be more people. Now, some people won't like that because they don't want anybody else coming to town or anybody else crowding our streets. But if we really want to have more housing for people, that's a great avenue. And and there was a discussion about modern day versus the past. That's a current modern day issue that we can address. We have the power to address. So again, that's my feeling on it, Mayor Ward.
Mayor Ward, this is Commissioner Wu. I have some comments.
Thank you. Go ahead.
I echo lots of comments made by council members and the fellow commissioners. And I think we need to address both issues. We need a more supply of land. The way to do it is to expand our affordable housing overlay zone, especially considering adding some mixed use. For example, South El Camino Real can get a little more units in the Pico corridor. Between Veracruz and La Plata, there's strip malls, and they can be in the future to be zoning to a mixed use zone, because some of those big retail, they have extra parking. And by converting them into mixed use, you can add a lot of housing units there without increasing the parking demand. So increase the supply of land or increase the available land for housing development, and that's one side of it. And in order to do it, we probably need to look at the development standard, because any increase or most increased fee will become a burden on developers, and that fee should be mostly offset by a relaxation of development standards, so we don't put it undue financial burden on developers. So increasing mixed use and utilizing or reforming our parking requirements is the way to address that. And then on the other side, we also need a more capital. We need more money, and by raising the fee. Currently it's 4%. What we should do is to raise the fee in steps, and then monitor the result that it will help to produce affordable housing. With the 15% to be the ceiling, we will never increase the fee too much to exceed the actual construction cost, right? But because some of the affordable housing developers like Jamboree or Habitat for Humanity, they have the access to other funding resources. So the increased in lieu fee will stop at a certain point, but it's going to it will help to produce more units, because the city will have more money to subsidize those organizations, and therefore they can produce more affordable housing units. So I think that's a two-pronged approach, that we raise the fee step by step to monitor the progress, to decide if we want to raise them further, comparing to the RHNA unit requirement. Eventually, the city council needs to make a decision, a political decision, that how much affordable housing do we want to produce? We can play with the number and tell the HCD that we do have enough land that's zoned for affordable housing. But at a certain point, the state will look at the result. And if we're too far off, then we have the risk of being penalized. So that's my comment.
Okay. Kathy, Bart Crandall here.
Yes.
I've got a concern, I don't think the additional dwelling units really is a manageable way of getting low cost housing, because all of a sudden we're jumping into working with residents, not developers, and we're getting into rent control. And trying to do that on all these additional dwelling units, I think, is unwieldy and probably almost impossible, unless I can be proven wrong, I'm sure, but impossible to implement. We did hear tonight that probably the smallest project that pencils if you get free land is 10 units. We're charging in lieu fees on people, I think, is it 4 or 6 units, who can't even build a dwelling unit. So they're out of the loop of being able to provide a affordable unit. And they're paying a fee for it, which is okay. And I think the in lieu fee, how it's calculated, we've been talking about construction cost of the units and whatnot. It all comes down to the cost of the land. We know a 10-unit project will work if they don't have to pay for the land. So that's probably an easier way to calculate it. That the in lieu fees should help to subsidize the land purchase, whether it's done by the city to buy the land with that in lieu fee and have it designated for a developer. It seems that would work because I don't see that, like everybody says, unless we go up, 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 we're not going to get units or projects of any more than probably 10 to 20 units at the most. I think the project downtown sits on probably 3 single family lots, and they were able to get 19 units on it. So you figure if you can find 3 adjacent lots for sale, you could get 19 low cost units on it. I think Don is probably right. You split the difference and say, okay, 10%, 4%, 15%, 10%. It's going to be a guess because I don't think there's a formula that's going to give us a number. And those are my thoughts to at least get the conversation going.
Okay, no, I appreciate that. That was a good point, not working with developers. So I agree. Don, did you have another point?
Yeah, another question. We got into a serious discussion last time. I know there's 2 new council members involved here, and was how to calculate it, the fee. In other words, is there a simple, and I think we all discussed it, we got into a discussion of how it's currently calculated, and I think we all came away with a guidance or a put to the contractor and to staff to make it simple, and they've come back to us and say, make it simple. We're kind of in a do loop here of how it's calculated. And I'd like a discussion on that, because maybe it's calculated based on the amount of square footage you're being built. So the person that builds a bigger house pays more versus the one that builds a smaller type of structure. I throw that out there for debate or input from the contractors and the expertise in the staff. But we need to, if we have to do this, keep it simple is the byword of this stuff, because the actual funding of it is very complex. But how you calculate it, somebody that comes into planning to, Gabriel's desk guys out there, it's got to be something that the guy, the counter, and the applicant coming in the door can readily and simply calculate and understand. And that's the guidance
Okay. Darren, would you like,
I want to bring out. Thank you.
thank you. Darren, could you answer that?
Yes, I certainly can. Thank you very much. There are a number of ways that communities calculate these fees and manage their programs. The way that you do, at least the way it is written that you do, is effectively on a per square foot basis. The way that the program is described is that there is a schedule of building costs that is maintained by the building department that estimates, on a per square foot basis what it costs to build an apartment building versus a single family home, and then you charge 1% of that. Now, right now, what it says is that it costs $150 a square foot to build apartments. In reality, it costs $400 a square foot to build apartments. So that number is just way off. So you're charging $1.50 a square foot. It should be $4 a square foot, even within your own approach, because the number is just simply not reflective of the actual economics of development. Similarly, on a single family home, you're charging $1.67 a square foot, with the assumption that it costs $166 to build that. Again, when you factor in the cost of land, which we acknowledge is rare and costly in San Clemente, that figure should again be $4 a square foot or something significantly more. So there's this offset between the real cost of development and the way that you're currently charging it. One thing that I think might be a helpful way to kind of guide this particular part of the conversation is if you are interested in getting the units on site, and there are pros and cons to that, but given the amount of land and the scarcity of land, if there is concern that assembling a lot of money and making that available to a Jamboree or a Habitat or any other organization may not lead to a project because it's so hard to find land, you may choose to say, given that circumstance, we would prefer that developers provide the units within their project. If that is the case, if that is your policy goal, then it certainly makes sense to increase the fee from what it is now so that it is at least sort of a push, an equivalent cost to the developer between providing the units on site and paying the fee. As of right now, there is no incentive to provide the units on site because they can save a lot of money by paying your tiny fee as opposed to producing the units on site. So that might be one way to think about this question of should the fee itself be brought up to date, is do you think under your circumstances that it is best to have developers produce those units, even if they're spread throughout the city, a couple here, a couple there, and that may present certain challenges for sure. But if that seems like a more viable way to get affordable housing units in San Clemente, you may wish to change the incentive that currently pushes them to pay the fee instead of producing the units on site.
Darren, can you say again how you came up with the 10%? You were talking about that unit costs are 250,000, and so the fees should come to about 10,000.
The unit costs that we've calculated, actually, I was gratified to hear Habitat for Humanity suggest a similar number. We estimate that the actual costs, the all-in costs to produce the unit is a little over $400,000. And the value of that unit, the effective value based on the limited income and the ability to pay the mortgage or the rent on those units at very low income levels, means that those units are only worth $150,000. You're asking people, you're asking very, very low rents relative to the cost of construction. So the subsidy for those units is in the ballpark of $250,000. That's the delta between what it costs and what it's worth. That's the $250,000 number. So what I was saying about the 10,000 is, let's say you have a 100-unit project and it's supposed to build 4 units. Then those units would have an implied subsidy of $1 million. 4 units times $250,000 of implied subsidy per unit gets you $1 million, right? If the project is, again, it's a 100-unit project and they are not building those units, but rather paying you the fee, then the cost to the city or whomever to provide those units somewhere else is going to be $1 million, right? That's the $250,000 per unit subsidy. So you would need to collect $1 million, which equates to about $10,000 per market rate unit in the project that is not providing the affordable housing units on site, but rather is paying the fee. So that's the $10,000 number. And compared to that, right now, the city's current fee would be charging, depending on the size of the project or the size of the units in that market rate project, a couple $1,000s at most. So there's a big offset between the true cost of subsidizing the units versus what the city is charging. That's why it's such a great incentive for developers to pay the fee instead of producing those units on site.
Okay, so we need to get to the questions because we're over on time. The question is whether to raise the fee, split the cost, raise it to, to reflect more of what the market, what it costs. And so they're looking for 10% from 4%.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but that's not exactly how I would describe it.
Okay.
It's not 10% versus 4%. The $10,000 number reflects the 4% inclusionary requirement. if you change the 4% to something higher, as some have suggested, maybe looking at 10% inclusionary or 15% inclusionary, then that would suggest a different number altogether. But right now, the $10,000 number that we're talking about as an average, but again, it could be applied on a per square foot basis, so it may differ from one project to another. But the delta that I'm talking about is just bringing within the current parameters of your inclusionary program, which is 4% of units are supposed to be provided at very low incomes. Our suggestion is to update the fee so that it reflects the true cost of providing those units, which in round numbers is moving it up to $10,000 per market rate unit.
What percentage is that?
Of the cost of a
No,
market rate?
You know, you showed us a graph and you said that we're charging 4% or we require 4%. And then it said to raise the fee to 10 to 15%. So we're talking different things here. I just want to talk about percentages, you know, why we're trying to get it to 10 or 15. What is that going to equate to? Are you saying it's going to be $10,000 for a $1 million house?
The $10,000 figure would again reflect no change to your inclusionary policy. You would still be requiring 4% of units to be affordable at very low incomes, but the $10,000 per market rate unit would generate a sufficient amount of money that you could then offer that to a Jamboree or a Habitat or some other organization to produce the units that are otherwise being avoided by the market rate developer. Whereas right now, your fee structure would generate a small fraction of that amount of money. So I know there's a lot of moving parts here, but I'm trying to be as clear as possible. This is not suggesting at this point, the $10,000 number is not implying a change to the inclusionary standard. It is simply updating the fee that developers would pay to meet that standard.
I get that. I guess I'm just trying to find out that the 10% what we're charging is not exorbitant, is actually for a very low income unit and isn't just more money so that we can just hand it over to Jamboree. That's kind of what it sounds like to me. I'm trying to figure out, you know, I'd like it to be where the charge reflects what it would cost, you know, to build that unit. And you're adding in land costs and all of that. And what we heard from Jamboree and Housing for Habitat is they really want land for free. They don't want to pay for the land. They're looking for opportunities where the land is free. So, but we're putting into the cost the land. That's what I heard.
Gotcha. Well, I think it is to their credit that they've been able to identify enough sites to do on free land, but that certainly is not the standard case for affordable housing developers. Very often, as the CEO from Jamboree mentioned, they do have to compete on the open market to acquire land and pay market rate prices for that land. And that is an underlying assumption. You are correct that is a part of the assumption in our analysis, is that there is a cost to the developer to acquire the land, is correct. But the alternative is that the city of San Clemente makes land available for free. And I have not heard that you have a supply of land that you are willing to make available for free.
Okay, yet we want to charge what it would cost for that provider to come in for the land. And I don't know if that's fair to charge developers for all of those costs. I'm not sure of that. You know, I thought we were just doing it for the cost of what the unit would be, and trying to raise that up to the actual cost, but it sounds like it's got a lot more in it. And my understanding of Jamboree and all of those is that all of the builders within the county and California actually, you know, pay and give money to these organizations so that they can do affordable housing. So I thought that that's how that they got land to do that. No.
that is not my understanding. I don't know if anyone from Jamboree remains on the call to respond to that, but that has not been my experience in working with affordable housing developers.
There's no free lunch. They're not printing for land, as the old saying goes. And so,
Yeah, I just don't know, with us, with limited, we don't have large projects, to do Mendocino again. And I don't know if it's right to charge them for all of the costs, all baked in, for someone to do affordable housing project. I don't know. That's.
Mayor Ward,
Yes.
this is Jennifer. So again, you have two questions before you. The one we're talking about right now is the fee. And to clarify, what Darren is describing is changing from a generally 1%, it's not always 1%, but generally a 1% inclusionary in lieu fee, to actually be a dollar amount. So it's not percentage to percentage, but rather it's percentage to dollar amount. And to answer that question, I would certainly say that tonight we've heard from a number of commissioners and councils that we want it to not burden developers. And EPS has the information to be able to show that in numbers, and so we can provide that moving forward in the report. And then the second question before you is, where we want the percentage of units to be. Definitely some mixed comments on that. But I think that from a consensus standpoint, it sounds like we don't want to just choose a number. We don't want to choose it based on our neighbors. And so I think that provides us some good direction and feedback to answer that question and move forward in producing the final report.
Does anyone else want to weigh in on that?
Mayor Ward? Yes.
Who said that?
That was Mike. I'm finally connected. If I
Okay.
could have another try, if you wouldn't mind.
Okay.
All right, thank you. Okay, I definitely, I'm hearing a lot of good information about the need and percentages and fees. But one of the things that I keep hearing is that we're going to be possibly using land. So we're going to be accommodating development, and just wanted to, again, consider the source. I'm a land use planner. It's what I do for many years, and I appreciate it. But I also appreciate not developing where we don't need to. And so when we were talking about, why we needed a major arterial through town, and we looked at what we were going to lose by allowing that to happen. We questioned the need for it. I only suggest, and I'm doing this because I've got everybody on this call here. We're all listening. We have council on board listening. And we should consider how we use our land and whether or not we really need to encumber it, when it's still, in my mind, going to be questionable how we're really going to have a need in the coming years. So again, looking at old numbers and old math doesn't necessarily mean that need is still there as we thought a decade or even a year ago. We have tools, we have tools like adaptive reuse. I mean, what are our vacancies going to look like when COVID settles? Are we going to have full vacancy again in our industrial areas? Is there going to be opportunity for space there? Just to consider, undeveloped land and earmarking it for housing of any kind. I think it's worthy of a second thought and maybe even a pause. We have to consider the impacts on our infrastructure, our resources. And the planners on this call understand what upper limit means and how close are we to that. So even if it's 500 units, 50 units, 6,000 units, what is that really going to do to our community in terms of, available resources and infrastructure and impacts of traffic, parking, et cetera. So these are all things that I think are worthy of discussion. It's an important decision that's going to be made here, and it's probably a necessary one. I just don't know that we have all of the right information available to us to commit to something like this.
So I think what I'm hearing, in the staff report, I don't think we had it in there that that our zoning didn't match. Does anyone have the page that it was on? I wasn't aware that the fees were different. Was that in our?
It was not in the report, I don't believe. I didn't see it.
Okay.
And just to clarify,
I think-
the fees. Just to clarify, the fees are not different. It's rather the percentage of units required in each development. But I would say that we definitely do have the feedback that we would need to produce that draft report. And then when we came back with that draft report, it would provide a lot of visual information to show and answer the questions, both in the percentage of the number of units required in a development, and then changing the fee from a percent to a dollar amount.
Okay, so I don't know about anyone else, but I think I need more. Don, are you trying to talk?
Well, yeah, just one more point that we touched on briefly that I think Darren hit was how you calculate this thing to a dollar amount, what the building department uses versus market reality. There's a huge disconnect there, and I think one takeaway to staff is we need to generate or go to a more dynamic standard of construction cost computation and make sure it's appropriate. I would defer to like Bart or some of the architect guys on the call here of if the building department now is saying for residential it's $110 a square foot, when you know it's $300 or $400 a square foot, and I can compute that from the house I'm sitting in that I built, that we're way off, and we need to come to some more dynamic methodology of computing if you want to go from a percentage to a dollar cost. We're spinning our wheels unless we come up with a methodology how that's calculated, and that's what I think is critical that we need to get our hands around, because the number differential that Darren brought up is pretty substantial for both a rental property and a single dwelling, and that's probably one of the most key things that we need to get our hands around, or the staff, you and the expertise of some of the experts we brought to the table here, that you make that fine balance so you don't penalize the developer. With the same token, this per square foot charge is on some basis of reality. And so that's the only thing I really, before we sign off on this call, that's a very critical thing. And I think Jennifer, if you want to convert this all to dollars rather than percentages, yeah, but how that dollar is computed is even more critical.
Yeah, one last comment, Madam.
Wait, hold on one moment. Zen Wu is before you, and then I'll get back to you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Ward, and thank you, Councilman Knobloch. I'd like to respond to Dan's comment about the baseline building cost. That could be a 2000 US dollars. So it's out of date, but it can still stay. Reason if we want to change it to reflect today's construction cost, it's going to have a ripple effect on a lot more than just inclusionary in lieu fee program. Any residents going to renovate their house, and they use that number as cost basis of the building permits and other things. So I think the easiest one, if we just want to look at in lieu fee, is to raise the percentage, not to touch that number. Of course, that number can be adjusted, but that needs a much wider, a much deeper consideration of a lot of other things.
Darren, thank you.
Thank you. I certainly appreciate that comment. And what we would suggest there is not to change the building department's building valuation schedule at all. It is instead that we simply don't use that as the basis of the calculation of this particular fee. So for additions, for renovations, for things like that that are tied to that schedule of costs, that would continue to be the same. But it is rare in my experience, and I've worked on these inclusionary programs in probably 30 different communities in California. It is rare that the cost on that schedule serves as the basis for calculating the in lieu fee. San Clemente is rare in that case, and I think they can be divergent, and you don't need to worry that the fact that we're calculating a new fee is going to affect those other types of projects, as I think you are rightfully concerned about.
Okay, Councilmember Knobloch and then Bart Crandall.
Yeah, just a comment. When the consultant is looking for input from us, we spend a lot of time talking about that we start with the concept of we have a fee and how much do we charge. We need to back that up and say, do we even need a fee? This is premised on the in the outline in the discussion tonight that there will be fees, fines, and punishments if we don't provide this. There will be no fees, fines, or punishments if we don't produce this. Many cities don't provide at all. We have instead of looking at how much are we going to extract from each developer, if we have a concept of business-friendly, free enterprise, then we don't say how much can we involuntarily extract from you for a good purpose. We say, how could we help you, a business person, achieve your goal of getting a house built in San Clemente or an ADU built in San Clemente without taking months and months and months and thousands of dollars to do it, which increases the cost. We've got swimming pools in this town that have been for 10 months. I just think we need to focus on not what we extract, but how can we help development occur where it can occur. And we've got a built out town, so we don't want to squeeze a lot of infill and super high density. We do what we can, but I think we need to start from the premise of this concept of fees. Let's look back and say, do we really need a fee at all?
Okay, Mr. Crandall.
Yeah, I don't argue with your premise, Councilman Knobloch, but any builder building anywhere, development project has park fees, open space fees. They've got to dedicate X amount of their land as open space. That's a fee. You have to provide amenities of parkland, green belts, et cetera, et cetera. This is basically another one to make the community work and provide housing for a good cross section of the citizens of the town. So I don't like it really being called a fee. It's certainly it is a burden. It's one more of many to the developer. And the reason we got the 100 some odd unit one in Talega was they were obligated to do it. They put the land forward and said, we don't want to do it. Here's the land, do it here. But the other thing of coming up, nobody's ever going to come up with a perfect cost for what this fee is. There's no formula for it because a 1-story unit costs X amount. If you have a 2-story building, each unit costs something different. You have 3 units, it's more economical to build a unit. 1 roof for 3 units, 1 foundation for 3 units. So it's going to be a general rule of thumb estimate that the number is going to be. I mean, it's not going to be precise, but I think the other thing to keep in mind, if we're thinking small little projects here and there, Jamboree mentioned the only reason it can work is they're local and they can manage it. Trying to have a management company manage these little small projects is extremely difficult, especially if who's paying that manager. If 1 or 2 units in the thing is low cost, or if they were for sale, who's managing it? Is the city going to monitor how much these houses are sold for? It's a real problem. So that needs to be in the back of our minds. It's not a question here tonight, but we need to think who's going to monitor it and manage it if small infills and make it work.
Well, I appreciate your comments, Bart, but the fee is what it is. You can call it whatever you want, but it's an involuntary extraction of money from a developer. That fee will be passed on to the buyers. That's how our free market economy works. And again, my comment was to just say, we have a fee and we're discussing how much we charge. My comment is, do we back up and say, do we need to charge at all? Is this program working? And can we have it work to accomplish our goal of housing and affordable housing in another way? That's my concern.
Oh, that's a fine approach. And I think we do need to figure out how to get it accomplished.
So I think our choice, Bart, is if we don't charge an in lieu fee, we require the housing to be built with the development. I mean, isn't that our choice? I mean, what tools do we have if we don't have?
That's not our choice. Excuse me but our choice is we have a three-pronged policy and program. We're talking about the fees. If we don't handle the fees, we're not required to do either of the other two. We can modify. We're talking about modifying one of the prongs. We could modify all three prongs. We're free to do whatever we want as a policy-making body. I'm sorry to interrupt, Mayor Ward.
So I'm just looking at and talking to Bart. What would if we didn't have a fee as a tool to try to help do housing, what else would the city have if we'd have to require that housing be built with every development? Would we not?
Mayor Ward,
certainly that, yeah. Unless there's a way to zone it and make some other approach other than the fee, but the one way to get it is to require it. They be built.
This is Commissioner Wu. I think Councilmember Noblak alluded to something that perhaps a deregulation of our development standards. So, but I'm more than happy to hear the idea Councilmember Noblak has to solve that problem without charging a fee.
Yeah, I'm not sure how we're going to get low income housing if we don't have something.
We're not getting it now.
Say that again, Steve.
I say it's a good question, Mayor Ward, and we're not getting it now. And our system has changed. We got it with 20 years ago, but our town has long since built out. So I'm not sure that protocol, that paradigm of the three-pronged approach is even valid today, other than a source of revenue to extract from the developers.
Okay, well, we all need to represent
arena numbers, and those are mandates.
the
You have to get
suggestions
there some way or another.
of what we can come back with, Darren, that you guys could go forward with, because you're hearing a lot of questions.
We certainly are, and certainly a divergence of opinion, as we heard last time. Everything from no program, no fee to let's ramp it up to address our affordable housing needs. So I appreciate that there's a divergence of opinion here. We have produced a lot of material that I think maybe the next step, and I believe Jennifer Savage was suggesting this, is that we produce as much detail as you might hope to absorb, and come back for a conversation about how you've absorbed that, what questions you may have on the technical side, and what your policy wishes ultimately may be. It is a complicated issue, and I think many communities are looking at inclusionary housing. I mean, there's over 100 communities in California that have inclusionary policies, but certainly not all communities do. And an increasing number of communities that we work for are looking for a more comprehensive way to address their affordable housing need, not solely putting the responsibility on new market rate developers to create housing, create affordable housing, but also looking at a variety of other programs and funding sources and so forth that can spread that burden a bit broader. That is not our charge right now to help you with that very broad question, but certainly it is a worthy conversation to have.
Okay, so I think the comment was made last time, and that whatever program that we do, or our goals need to be focused on our city, you know, and our constraints and how it would actually work. Because I think that's what I'm just not seeing yet. You know, I do understand affordable housing overlays. You know, we certainly, everybody's worked hard on that. You know, maybe you could come back where we look at opportunities. There's underutilized commercial space. You know, I know that's what a lot of other cities did. They looked at, you know, but they had big sprawl and then big commercial districts, and we just don't have that. So, you know, if you could give us solutions on you know, on that, you know, I'm just not seeing it yet in this, and I don't think I can make a decision on
Mayor
a
Ward.
charge. Yes, Ms. Councilmember James.
You know, maybe I'm incredibly naive, but I understand the state mandates and how that's going to impact us. But at the same time, you know, being a great believer in laissez-faire economics, I'm struggling with the fact that we even have a fee associated with development. And again, I understand I'm being naive, but not only are we working against an issue with land, but I think we're also dealing with the fact we're dealing with the marketplace as well. And, you know, developers are able to make more money off of other type of projects than low income projects. And quite honestly, that's what the free marketplace is about. So I'm struggling with this, but I'm not so naive that I don't realize that there's a state mandate we have to look at. But I'm going to struggle with this, and that's my only comment for the night. Thank you.
Okay, so I think we all need a lot more information and how this would work in our city, where it's going to come to, you know, some solution. I just don't want to say, well, this is how much it costs, you know, we're just going to charge everyone and hope it might happen. I want to see that it actually could happen, you know, in order to justify charging someone that fee, you know, or other possibilities. Because it sounds like right now, they're just looking for what the city of San Clemente, what land we can provide. And I'm not sure we have it.
Madam Mayor, this is Gabriel, President Planner. And as far as discussion today, you know, I guess, you know, I think, Darren, I'm not sure if you have the information that you think you need from Planning Commission and City Council. You know, the few of the things that I've been hearing as staff is, you know, there's not necessarily consensus to do away with the program, that no one is saying to go back to what the zoning code reads today, which is 15%, that either 4% is fine, but that it is, but, you know, it could be higher than 4%, but no higher than 15%. So maybe the analysis that Darren looks at will provide that information back to Planning Commission and City Council. And this is not the last time you'll see this. This is going to come back to the Planning Commission. This is going to come back to the City Council. You will have the opportunity to make a decision on this. You're not making that decision tonight. Okay. And Darren, that's what I heard today. Is there anything else you want to add to that? Just to see if we're, you know, I'm understanding what I'm hearing from the body today.
Yeah, I think the one thought that I have that may be not exactly in our scope, but something that we can do is help to think about, again, Mayor, your indication that you need to understand how it can work under San Clemente's very specific circumstances. And so one of the things that maybe we can flesh out a bit more is the idea that this is not necessarily even about the construction of new units all the time. In the event that you choose to have a fee, that fee can be used to acquire the affordability rights for some of the units that you already have that are expiring, and extend the affordability of existing units, or acquiring units that already exist that don't have affordability restrictions on them, but you could place them on them. And so think about different ways that you might be able to spend the fees, even if you keep them exactly where they are now. The breadth of programs that you might be able to put that toward. It is not required that if you're collecting a fee, that it specifically go to an offsite brand new construction project. You can use it for a whole number of ways to enhance affordability in your community, including, as I mentioned, the concerns about displacement of your existing residents who many of whom are cost burdened and potentially going to face displacement for market reasons. And so maybe that's something that we can flesh out a bit more for the next conversation.
I would appreciate that, because we do have quite a few senior housing, affordable housing, and I have dealt with some people in the past where I did ask when that contract was up. And, you know, they only had like another 15 years or so. So I would be interested in hearing that as an opportunity. You know, I wasn't ever sure how we could keep those affordable. Okay.
A program like this is one of the ways.
Okay. All right. So I'm sorry this took so long. I think we all just kind of expected some presentations tonight to hear how this works and try to figure out how it even could be managed in San Clemente. So, you know, so I guess this is going to the Planning Commission next on their own.
That's correct.
Okay. Well, good luck. We'll be following that. But I hope you get more information, because I know, you know, for us to charge a fee, we really need to know why we're doing it and what it's going to go for.
Can I just say one thing in parting here? I, like Jean, struggled through this, I think, a little bit. You know, I think part of the struggle here is I don't think anybody's convinced that raising this percentage or raising the in lieu fees is going to solve the problem, right? I think that's where we're keep butting up our heads against. It's like, we don't think it's actually going to work, right? So why are we you know, if we thought that way, I think it'd be easier to come to numbers. I just want to say I endorse Zen's idea of that, particularly that Pico stretch. And I live in Talega, so I have a personal stake in that. But I think maybe that's the way we need to think about it. I mean, I think when I think of the projects that work, it's integrated projects that are really primarily affordable housing projects, not here or there, an ADU here, 1 unit and an 8 unit complex, like you say, is going to be hard to manage. So I think maybe we need to come to an idea of what we're trying to do here, right? Like, are we just trying to prove to the state we're doing something, or are we going to actually get more affordable housing? If we're going to try and get more affordable housing, we need to provide incentives to builders, not penalize them. In that sense, I agree with Steve. And so anyway, that's just where I come from after listening to all of this with my sort of layman's cap on in terms of this area. I do hope for more direction when we get back, more clarity from our staff about what they think will work and what won't work. Just laying it out for us creates this kind of back and forth that doesn't seem to move the ball down the field.
Okay. All right. So
Mayor Ward,
yes.
Excuse me, Mayor Ward, just to remind you, we do have public comments that have not been heard yet.
Thank you. Let's do that.
Okay. I'll move through them quickly. First comment is from Denise Fleury and Rick DeBello. We are writing to you to provide input on San Clemente's inclusionary housing policies. We have lived and worked in our home in San Clemente for over 22 years. Lack of affordable housing is a continuing crisis in California. Cities in South Orange County, including San Clemente, are not exceptions to this. Many of us are very lucky to enjoy a wonderful quality of life here, but rising housing costs increasingly make good affordable housing out of reach for many of those who live in or work in our city. About 15% of San Clemente households, 3,600, have an income of less than $35,000 a year. A total of 24% of households, 5,760, earn less than $50,000 per year. While we we couldn't find readily available statistics, the housing cost burden for many of these households, that is 30 to 50% or more of income spent on housing costs, is likely very high. Of the 28,753 jobs we have in San Clemente in 2017, an increase of 10% over jobs in 2007, only about 20% of workers, 4,554, actually live and commute to work within San Clemente. Many of the rest of the jobs are filled by workers who commute here. It is difficult for lower wage earners and other essential workers to find attainable housing here. We should help provide more opportunities for good, affordable homes for people who live and work here, as well as for those who already work here and would like to live here, truly becoming part of and contributing to our community. It is good to see that the City Council and Planning Commission are re-examining the city's inclusionary housing policies. We support changes to our current inclusionary housing policies. We ask that San Clemente require at least 15% of the units in any new or rehabilitated housing development be designated for affordable housing for people with extremely low, very low, and low incomes. That better aligns with our city's household as well as our workforce needs. It simply is not possible to include affordable housing units in any given project. We ask that the in lieu fees be set at 3% of the value of each of the market rate units that are built to be placed in our special city fund. These designated housing funds are critical to creating affordable housing elsewhere in the city. Quality, attainable housing often can be built by nonprofit developers who understand how using city funds coupled with other matching funds can be used to accomplish this challenging task. Current fee levels are inadequate to support building alternative housing elsewhere. That's it for the 3 minutes on this comment, so I'm going to move on. Next comment is from Reverend Kent Doss and Rona Henry. Welcoming Neighbors Home Initiative is a ministry of Tapestry, Unitarian Universal Congregation. Our building is in Lake Forest, but our members live throughout South Orange County, including San Clemente. We work to serve and advocate for people experiencing homelessness or who are at risk of losing their home. We are concerned about the increasing problem of homelessness and the lack of attainable housing for those who are most vulnerable. We want our local government to attend to the needs of all of its residents. We compliment San Clemente for commissioning the inclusionary housing study. Given San Clemente's high housing costs and significant shortage of affordable homes, many workers and families, especially those on the lower economic rung, overpay for housing and struggle financially to live and work here. About 1/4 of San Clemente residents earn less than $50,000 per year, which makes them eligible for very low income affordable housing. We urge San Clemente to update their inclusionary housing policy to require at least 15% of the units in any housing development of 6 or more units to be designated for affordable housing, with a split of 5% for extremely low income, 5% for very low income, and 5% for low income. In cases where affordable housing is not feasible on site, we urge you to increase the in lieu fees to 3% of construction costs to be put into a fund for gap funding of affordable housing. And we ask that the city actively recruit affordable housing developers to San Clemente by providing gap funding, density bonuses, parking allowances, design flexibility, and other incentives. We also urge you to ensure that alternative sites for affordable housing are in high opportunity areas near schools, shopping, transit, and jobs. It's a sad fact that incomes in our area have not kept pace with housing costs. Now is the time to start seriously addressing the housing crisis that is likely to worsen with the recent economic strains imposed on families and individuals by the coronavirus. Please consider the needs of all your residents as you update your inclusionary housing policy. Thank you for your time. Reverend Kent Doss, Minister, Tapestry Unitarian Universalist Congregation, Rona Henry, Chair. Welcoming Neighbors Home Initiative. Next comment is from Ryan Lenny. Dear San Clemente City Council members and Planning Commission, throughout my time working in San Clemente, I've known it to be an incredibly beautiful and humbly prosperous city. I'd like to see our city further live up to this image by updating our inclusionary housing policies so that people from all walks of life can call San Clemente home. Working as a surf instructor, I've met many residents who fall into the 28% of San Clemente renters who spend over 50% of their monthly income on housing. I've had many coworkers who have to commute to work from surrounding cities due to the often exorbitant cost of housing in San Clemente. And as we move forward into the new year, many more residents will struggle to pay rent as a result of challenges faced during the pandemic. They will either have to move away from the city they know and love, or else join the nearly 100 people without homes in San Clemente to show that we care about the well-being of all our citizens and not just those with high incomes. I strongly suggest that we update our inclusionary housing policy to require that at least 15% of units in new developments are designated for people with low and very low incomes. Our current standard of 4% doesn't meet that bar set by our neighboring cities, and it simply doesn't work. Given the gap between land available in San Clemente and the number of affordable units we need to see built. Additionally, I believe that we need to increase the in lieu fees from 1% to at least 3% of total construction costs. The funding these fees will generate will allow us to work with organizations like Jamboree to create affordable developments that take the weight of housing costs off the backs of many in our community. I hope that you will join with me in understanding the importance of restructuring our goals to reflect the needs of all people who call San Clemente home. Next comment is from Deanna Gullo. I would like to provide input on San Clemente's inclusionary housing policy. I'm a homeowner in San Clemente. I'm very concerned over 20% of San Clemente residents have extremely low or low income. In addition, over 28% of renters had a housing burden of over 50% of their income. I am also concerned about the many homeless housing and food insecure residents in San Clemente. I strongly recommend that San Clemente change the way it works with housing builders and developers. I would like San Clemente to require at least 15% of the units in any new development be designated for affordable housing for people with extremely low, 5%, very low, and low incomes, 10%. If it's not possible to include the building of affordable housing on site, I ask that the current in lieu fees paid to the city by the builder be increased to 3% of construction costs. These housing funds are critical to creating affordable housing elsewhere in the city, often built by nonprofit developers. The current fee of 1% is inadequate. I also ask that San Clemente work much more proactively with affordable housing builders to develop more homes for people with low income in the city by creating incentives and reducing barriers to build here. The harsh and cruel comments, behaviors, and policies of the San Clemente City Council in recent years towards the needs of the homeless and low income in our city have been shamefully embarrassing. We have a diverse community here in San Clemente, and our housing policies need to serve all of our residents. San Clemente has become unaffordable to far too many people. Next comment is from Bill Hart. I am bewildered by the various recommendations of affordable housing advocates who simply do not understand the law. Which law? The law of supply and demand. When a commodity grows scarce, its price goes up. In this case, the commodity in San Clemente is coastal property. Coastal property has become scarce, therefore its pricing is going up. As a result, the only way artificially low prices can occur is if the government mandates a transfer of someone's property value to someone else. In other words, government confiscation. It is alarming that a Dana Point resident, one who has little regard for the laws or economics or property rights, organizes an effort to force San Clemente government to enact 15 to 25% wealth transfers. She must think this is Venezuela or Cuba. But then again, this isn't her town, so she has little skin in the game. Socialism has been tried many times and it has never worked. I urge the City Council and Planning Commission to implement a sensible response to state requirements, but let's not go overboard. As far as I know, our town still holds dear our American way of life. Next comment is from Irene McEwen. Affordable housing needs are at an all-time high. The lack of affordability in our community is driving an increase in rent subsidy requests to our local nonprofits, as well as driving force in homelessness. During these times of high unemployment, the problem is only going to get worse. The city currently requires developers to set aside 4% of housing projects of 6+ units for affordable housing, or they can pay a fee of 1% of the construction costs. It is my understanding that currently these fees do not accumulate to a significant enough amount to address the issue. I would like to see the requirement increase to at least 15% or the fee increase to 5% or more to help address this growing need. This is such a pressing issue, and I have confidence that the city of San Clemente will step up its efforts to be more proactive in helping to look for solutions for more affordable housing. Thank you for this opportunity to express my opinions. Next comment is from Elizabeth Hines. I'm a resident of San Clemente and lived in this lovely beach town for almost a decade. I've lived in many places, but San Clemente is the place I choose to make my forever home. I would love to be part of the catalyst for many others to make this their forever home too. I've become increasingly concerned about the problem of housing and food insecurity and homelessness for residents in San Clemente. I listen to my fellow residents gripe and complain about the growing homeless population, but without affordable housing available, where can we expect them to live? This is not someone somewhere else's problem. It is our problem, and this could be the beginning of a solution. California has a crisis with adequate and affordable housing. San Clemente is asked to do its fair share under state requirements to ensure that opportunities exist to build housing attainable for those in lower income categories. In other words, support our city's essential workers and low wage earners. They need to be able to find affordable housing here. Again, this is our problem, not someone somewhere else's problem. I strongly recommend that San Clemente require at least 15% of the units in any new development be designated for affordable housing, or increase the current in lieu fees paid to the city by the builder to 3% of the construction cost. With today's rising property prices, 1% is simply inadequate. I would also like to see San Clemente be proactive in working with affordable housing builders by creating incentives and reducing barriers to build here. We can be part of the solution. Let's take this opportunity to improve our wonderful beach and make it a place where we can all live and enjoy. It has been proven many times over that one of the first steps in solving the homeless problem is to provide shelter. Affordable housing is the right solution. Again, this is our problem, not someone somewhere else's problem. We also need a range of housing in San Clemente for our low income and workforce residents like teachers, grocery store workers, retail workers, and our healthcare workers. In other words, our essential workers, especially now, we need them here. Let's be part of the solution. Next comment from Kathy Ashafani. My name is Kathy Ashafani. I'm a resident of San Clemente. My husband and I love our community, but we are troubled by the serious lack of affordable housing here. 20% of San Clemente families have incomes categorized as low or extremely low, and the lack of affordable homes for these families leads to financial stress, overcrowding, and homelessness. I urge city leaders to enact specific changes to our inclusionary ordinance that will make the ordinance truly robust and lead to the creation of more affordable housing. First, I urge you to significantly increase the amount of affordable units required in new developments. Rather than the current requirement that just 4% of the units be set aside as affordable in a project of 6 units or more, I believe San Clemente should require developers to make at least 15% of the new units affordable to lower income households. More specifically, 5% of the new units should be affordable to extremely low income families, 5% to very low income, and 5% to low income. Second, I urge you to increase the in lieu fees developers pay as an alternative to providing on-site affordable units. The current rate of just 1% of construction costs is way too low. In lieu fees should be high enough to be a fair substitute for providing on-site affordable units. Moreover, in lieu fees should be high enough to generate funds San Clemente can use to help support affordable housing construction in the city. I urge you to increase in lieu fees to at least 3% of construction costs. If the city makes these two improvements in its inclusionary ordinance, increasing in lieu fees and increasing the amount of affordable units required in a development, San Clemente will show it is truly committed to meeting the affordable housing needs of its residents. Thank you. Next comment is from the BIA, the Building Industry Association of Southern California. Dear council members and planning commissioners, on behalf of our membership, I write to express our strong opposition to the inclusionary zoning and encourage the city to reduce or eliminate the inclusionary zoning requirement. The Building Industry Association of Southern California, Orange County chapter is a nonprofit trade association of over 1,100 member companies employing over 100,000 people in the home building industry. Housing remains a critical issue in California, with the situation growing more serious with each passing day. Studies show that the state needs over 180,000 new units each year, and at best we are producing 80,000. This has caused a cascading spike in home prices across the region. With this ever-growing deficit, we need to have an honest conversation about inclusionary zoning policies. In total, such policies restrain housing production, increase ownership costs, and further complicate attainability for the majority of the region. In a study by Benjamin Powell, PhD, and Edward Stringham, PhD, titled Housing Supply and Affordability, Do Affordable Housing Mandates Work?, the authors discovered that in the 45 cities where data was available, new housing production drastically decreased by an average of 31% within 1 year of adopting inclusionary housing policies. Additionally, the study suggests that inclusionary housing policies can increase new housing costs by 22% to 22,000 to 44,000, with higher price markets increasing by $100,000. Supporting these conclusions in a recent report from the Legislative Analyst's Office titled Perspectives on Helping Low-Income Californians Afford Housing. In this report, it states, attempting to address the state's affordability challenges primarily through expansion of government programs likely would be impractical. Further, that extending housing assistance to low-income Californians who currently do not receive it, either through subsidies for affordable units or housing vouchers, would require an annual funding commitment in the low tens of billions of dollars. As such, it finds that many housing programs, vouchers, rent control, and inclusionary housing attempt to make housing more affordable without increasing the overall supply of housing. This approach does very little to address the underlying cause of California's high housing costs, a housing shortage. Foundations of the policy set aside the entire globe has been thrust into the middle of a pandemic. Residents around the country, especially in California, are being asked to self-quarantine and by extension, limit their access to work. The economic impact of this pandemic will take years to fully comprehend. Because of this, cities throughout Orange County are now looking at ways to reduce regulations and costs associated with developing housing as a means of spurring economic activity and to create new units. It's important to note that just recently, the city of Santa Ana voted to reduce their inclusionary zoning fee by 66% because not one permit has been pulled since they increased the fee in 2015. Direct evidence that such policies only hamper development. Thank you for your thoughtful consideration. Stephen Lamont, Chapter Executive Officer.
Laura, is that the last comment?
I have one more. I'm just pulling it. Actually, two more. Give me 1 second here. Next comment is from the Kennedy Commission. The Kennedy Commission is a broad-based coalition of residents and community organizations that advocates for the production of homes affordable for families earning less than $27,000 annually in Orange County. Formed in 2001, the commission has been successful in partnering and working with Orange County jurisdictions to create effective housing and land use policies that's led to the new construction of homes affordable to lower income working families. The commission is writing to provide comments on the City of San Clemente's inclusionary housing program and in lieu fee update. We have not had the opportunity to participate in the city's stakeholder meetings on this issue. We would welcome the opportunity to ensure that our perspective is considered. The city's current inclusionary housing program requires that projects with more than 6 units provide 4% affordable rental units for very low income households earning 50% or less of the area's median income, AMI, or the pay in lieu fee. The current in lieu fee is very low, based on 1% of construction value and compared to 4% of the subsidy needed to develop an affordable unit to ensure it corresponds with the current affordability gap. The current inclusionary housing program has not been effective in addressing the city's housing needs in a balances way. For the 2014 to 2021 housing element planning period, the city has a RENA of 134 very low and 95 low income units. Per RENA allocation progress report submitted by the city has built 69 or 46% of the 134 very low income units and 28 or 29% of the 95 low income units. However, for the above moderate income units, the city outperformed and exceeded the RENA by constructing 519 or 213% of the 244 above moderate income units. While 33 above moderate units were added in 2019, no units were added at the very low and low income levels in the same year. The San Clemente's inclusionary programs is deficient in its two main components. The 4% inclusionary is willfully below the standard used by most cities in Orange County and regionally. As highlighted in the consultant's analysis, the inclusionary percentage range for most of these programs is around 15% and very low, very low, and extremely low. In addition, the in lieu fee calculation also is well below the gap finance subsidy to create affordable housing that is not built as part of the development. The current calculation of 1% construction value used for the in lieu fee only contributes a fraction of gap funding needs of leverage affordable housing units. The EPS analysis highlights that the inclusionary fee needs to be at 4% of construction value to represent the 10,305 gap subsidy needed for affordable housing. The average lieu fees in inclusionary programs in Orange County average around $10,000 to $15,000 per unit, with the remaining fifth cycle RENA need of 136 lower income homes, an additional 441 coming in the sixth cycle update. It is important the city prioritize the development of new affordable homes by amending and strengthening its inclusionary housing program to prioritize housing production for low, very low, and extremely low households at a 15% requirement. The 3 minutes is up on that comment, so I'm going to move on to our final comment from William Crudinger. The in lieu fee needs to be raised. Developers almost always choose to pay the fee, leaving low-income families in a lurch. The in lieu fee needs to be high enough to have a deterrent effect on building without low-income units. And that is all I have for public comments.
Okay, thank you. So I think that takes us to oral communications part 2. Do we have any comments?
We do not have any comments.
Okay. Would someone from the city council like to do the adjournment, or I can do that?
I'll move we adjourn. Do we have a time certain to, we're not coming back to another meeting, are we?
No, I'll just say that we'll adjourn to the next regular city council meeting and scheduled to take place on January 19th, 2021 via teleconference. Closed session items will be considered at 5:00 p.m. and the regular business meeting will commence at 6:00 p.m.
Thank you. I'll amend my motion to include that. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. So I'll second that.
Second.
Thank you, Jean. Just take a straw. Let's take a vote really quick. Who do we have left? Councilmember Duncan.
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem James.
Aye.
Councilmember Knobloch.
Aye.
Okay, and I am also an aye. And then the planning commission needs to adjourn.
I'll move the planning commission adjourns to the adjourned regular meeting to be held on January 20th, 2021 at 6 p.m. via teleconference.
Second.
Motion by Rulon, second by Brown. I'll call the roll for the vote. Commissioner Crandall?
Aye.
Commissioner Brown?
Aye.
Commissioner Blackwell?
Aye.
Commissioner Wu?
Aye.
Commissioner Kozinski?
Aye.
Commissioner Rulon votes aye. Passes unanimous.
Okay, so thank you, everyone. Darren and Julie for joining us, and Jennifer and Gabriel. Am I leaving out any other stuff? Oh, Cecilia and Scott Smith and Mr. Sun. Thank you for being with us, and I hope we get somewhere on this.
Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Good night.
Thank you.